to a song from nearly 30 years ago on her favorite oldies station. It reminded her of when she was 18, just about to become an adult. She remembered hearing it while she and Charlie enjoyed their first romance together. Her smile grew as she recalled how they were both eager to explore life. That summer after high school was filled with excitement and passion. They found many places to share quiet moments together. One of her favorite memories was of them lying on a quilt over hay bales in the loft of his uncle's barn, surrounded by the soft glow of the full moon. They wrapped themselves in the quilt as they cuddled, watching a fox in the meadow and listening to an owl, which seemed a bit annoyed by their presence. But summer eventually turned to autumn, and they both headed off to college, Charlie to a state university for agribusiness, and Rose to a college far away on a full scholarship for accounting. When they returned for their first summer back, they briefly rekindled their connection. However, Rose took internships each summer until she graduated and returned home only for a great job offer from the largest local bank. Even though they lived in the same town, they did not see each other again for 2 years. Charlie used her bank to support a business deal. There wasn't much talk about his career path since his family owned several farms in the area and a large store for commercial farming supplies where he worked as the assistant manager. After his father passed away from a heart attack a year later, Charlie inherited everything. Besides the family business, he also received a substantial life insurance policy and the cash from his father's estate. Once the deal concluded, Charlie no longer had ownership in the farm, but he kept the feed store and a small section of land that his great-great-grandfather had bought over 200 years ago. He also received a good amount of money, which he used to buy another store about 80 miles away, and added a franchise hardware store to both locations. Thanks to his skills and education, his profits quickly soared, tripling what he might have earned from the farms in just a few years. While some of his cousins were unhappy, they had all agreed to the deal, so they had to accept it. Rose was appointed as his bank coordinator, and over the next few months, they rekindled their friendship. Working lunches turned into working dinners, which turned into breakfasts after they spent the night together. No one was surprised when 18 months later, in a small Baptist church that his family had attended for generations, on a warm April afternoon, Rose Cheney became Mrs. Charlie Barton. After their honeymoon at a resort where clothing was optional, they returned home with many memories and no tan lines. Charlie then gifted Rose her wedding surprise, the money to start her own office, with his businesses as her first clients. This included a written agreement that ensured he would not gain from her profits. There had been a similar rule when he bought the stores, put in by his family to make sure that if he ever wanted to sell, they could buy them back easily, especially if he married and divorced. At the time, Charlie did not mind this rule, as it was before he and Rose were serious. He even wanted her rule to be included. Now, years later, Rose managed 8 offices in 2 states and traveled to different branches every month. She was no longer just an accountant. She was now a CEO. Charlie owned 4 stores and had a good income, while Rose earned about half of what he did each year. That was a lot of money by any standard, especially in this rural area where the county seat had only 40,000 people, and there was only one other town with just over 6,000 residents, a few miles from her home. She laughed as the song ended. Now they were seen as the redneck elite of their community, well off, but without the snobbery that often comes with wealth. They belonged to a country club but never acted like typical country club members. As she drove into the driveway of their 4-bedroom home, she sighed, feeling sadness that they hadn't filled the house with children. There had been a complication during the birth of their daughter, and she could no longer have kids. Instead, they poured their love into their only child and raised her to be a sensible, responsible adult. She had just graduated from college, and now the house felt empty. Her heels clicked on the stone floor as she walked through the entrance. Shoes were her one big treat since they became wealthy. Rose figured she owned 60 pairs of heels, and her annual shopping trip was approaching. Every year, she visited Atlanta, Charlotte, and Miami to update her wardrobe, mostly for new shoes. She always took her mother and daughter along, and her daughter was now even more excited about it than when she was younger. Charlie mostly wore practical clothes from LL Bean and the hardware stores, but he had a nice collection of suits for special occasions. He had only gained 15 pounds since they married, while she had actually lost weight thanks to her personal trainers. As she walked to the kitchen, she thought about how fortunate they were. They had money, looked good, had a wonderful child, and life felt perfect. Thursday was takeout night, and her nose told her that tonight's meal was Chinese, her favorite. After that, they might have Italian, barbecue, a burger from the diner in the next town, fish, or something from a new restaurant. Rose found it strange that the food was still in boxes. Charlie was sitting on the patio watching the sunset. She took some plates and filled them, carrying them to the table. She noticed he had a glass and a pitcher of sweet tea ready. She grabbed another glass and some utensils and sat beside him. She was a bit surprised he hadn't given her a kiss, and confused when she leaned over and he turned away so she only brushed his cheek. Worried, because that was not like him, she asked how his day had been. Still looking out over the fields, he replied, "It was pretty dull in the morning, but I had an interesting lunch." Rose smiled. Many people wanted something from Charlie. There was a 14-year-old girl in the FFA who wanted him to speak to her group, an 80-year-old retired librarian who hoped for a donation to name a building, vendors, and local customers. Charlie often took them out to lunch to talk. He was usually steady, but sometimes had unexpected moments, like when a clever 10-year-old suggested he should help build a school garden. He was so inspired that he rented the field next to the school and divided it for each class to have a plot. He provided the equipment and tools, along with 2 retired farmers to guide the students. The farmers did only what the kids couldn't, showing them how to do the rest. Each class decided what to plant and when. Every student had to spend an hour each week taking care of their garden. All the food went to the school cafeteria, where they made meals using the vegetables the students grew. Uncommonly for someone in his business, he insisted they only use organic materials. This program began 10 years ago, and the girl who had the idea was now working with the retired farmers as part of her college requirements. Charlie paid for her education and living costs without any hidden conditions, simply saying, "I believe in you." In exchange, she would work for him for 4 years after graduating. Now she called him Uncle Charlie and cared for him deeply. Despite his kindness, Charlie wasn't perfect. He could be abrupt with people who annoyed him, and he had no patience for those who tried to cheat in business or manipulate personal relationships. Slow to anger, when he finally lost his temper, he could be harsh in both public and private matters. He remembered every good deed done for him and also every wrong done to him. Someone must have said something wrong at lunch, she thought as she tried to relax. They would be in trouble, as their preacher often warned. Was she a pretty young woman or just some difficult old man looking for help? Quite attractive, actually, Amanda Peterson. Rose felt uneasy, both about who he had lunch with and the way he spoke. His tone was soft, but she recognized it as the quiet anger he sometimes showed. He got up and walked to the edge of the patio, gazing at the small lake he had created. "What did you talk about, dear? Adult matters?" Adult matters? Why would a 24-year-old woman discuss that with you? He turned to her, looking straight into her eyes. Her heart raced as she listened with a sense of dread. "Well, it seems she and Bobby want to have an open marriage. From what I've heard, it was his idea and he spent weeks convincing her. She wanted to know if I would be her first partner since she thought I would be gentle. We talked a long time, Rose. The poor girl was confused and afraid, but by the end of our talk, she was no longer scared. She was really angry. You might want to tell Bobby to be careful tomorrow because she might take action against him. You need to be cautious too. What were you thinking getting involved with her? She could sue you for a lot. This is still a state where that can happen. Now I want you to look me in the eye and tell me this isn't true, that you haven't done any of the things she mentioned, and that you're ready to defend yourself. Because if even a little bit of it is true, we are finished. Do you understand? Finished. If you have secrets, I will find them all. Now is the time for you to defend yourself if you can." Rose sat in disbelief, her mind racing, trying to form thoughts but struggling. No, not now. How could this have happened? Bobby assured her it was fine. Charlie stood silently for a moment before speaking. "I thought so. I'm leaving now. I think I'll go to the farm for a while. Don't try to reach me, not by phone, email, or any way at all. We'll talk when I'm ready, not before. I'm really disappointed in you, Rose. Rose didn't know how long it took her to move, but by the time she did, she could hear his truck driving away. She sat back down, staring at the untouched food, too stunned to cry. 2 hours later, the food was no good, covered in flies. The sunset had turned into a cloudy night. There were no stars shining, no signs of hope for her to hold on to. She stood up, leaving the mess for the housekeeper to deal with. Rose headed straight for the liquor cabinet, looking at the options. For someone who rarely drank, there was quite a selection. She smiled when she saw the half-full bottle of rye, Charlie's favorite. Her smile faded when she noticed her favorite vodka was almost empty. I might as well finish it, she thought, tilting the bottle until it was gone, and then opening another one. She filled a large glass with almost half a pint, adding ice and tonic, and carried it into the kitchen, where she added 3 slices of lime. For reasons she couldn't explain, she went back outside to the patio. Raising her glass toward the east, she said, "Good night, Charlie." Then Rose cried and drank, repeating this until she stopped crying and fell asleep. "Rose, Rose, are you okay? Wake up." She became aware of her surroundings as the housekeeper gently shook her. She was sprawled on a lounge chair, not very elegantly. Her skirt had slid up, and her head ached, but she didn't feel hungover. She had just worn herself out emotionally. She gathered her thoughts and smiled weakly at Mrs. Gannon, the housekeeper. A widow in her 60s, Mrs. Gannon worked 4 days a week for 6 hours each day. She and Charlie liked things tidy, so it didn't take her long to keep the place neat. Mrs. Gannon was also Charlie's great aunt. He hired her to help with her finances, making sure she received a full paycheck regardless of how much she worked. He even offered her one of the spare bedrooms, but she preferred her own apartment. "Sorry, Mrs. Gannon, I got a little carried away last night. Let me help you clean this up." "I can't believe Charlie left you out here like this. When he gets home, I'm going to have a talk with him." "Charlie wasn't here last night. This is all my fault. I just had a lot on my mind." Mrs. Gannon, though older, was sharp. She looked at the 2 plates, the 2 glasses of tea, and realized Charlie must have been there for at least part of the evening. This thought surprised her. It seemed there might be some trouble. The evidence before her, along with finding Rose in this state, led to all sorts of thoughts. She couldn't help but wonder about the hose. She usually did the laundry and had never found anything unusual in it before. Maybe it was just some sort of midlife change. "You go on in, Rose. Get cleaned up. You're not working today?" Suddenly, Rose remembered she was late. Luckily, she owned the place. She called her manager and assistant to say she'd come in after lunch and ask them to change her meetings. A long, hot shower helped her feel better. She looked in the mirror and thought, a bit proudly, how good she still looked while many of her friends had settled into everyday routines. She frowned at her reflection, noticing some changes, and wondered if it was time to make some adjustments. Charlie had always liked her the way she was. Then she felt a wave of sadness at the thought that things might never be the same again. Fighting back tears, she sat at the vanity and brushed her hair, thinking about how she ended up in this situation. She had embraced business easily. Using the money Charlie gave her as a wedding gift, she opened her first office. Charlie had also passed on his business to her after the family accounting firm closed down. Things went well, and within 2 years she opened another office in the county seat. The following year, she opened an office near Charlie's second store. Over 12 years, she grew to 5 offices and added 3 more later. She could have opened even more, but had to travel 1 week each month and didn't like being away from home longer than necessary. Her small county didn't have many places to socialize besides a few social clubs and the country club. She missed the lively bar scene from her college days more than she liked to admit. But now she had settled down. There were no bar crawls or late nights out in her future. It had been 10 weeks since she and Charlie had spent intimate time together. He had been ill with a bad flu for 3 weeks. Then she had to travel for a week, and when she got back, he had to leave to finalize a deal for his 3rd store. Soon after, she caught the flu too. By the time she felt better, she had to hit the road again. This dry spell was the longest they had ever experienced in their marriage. Now, just over 40, they still had a lively relationship, with 2 to 5 times a week, depending on their schedules. They sometimes enjoyed the hayloft at the farm just for fun. She would visit his office during lunch once in a while. Once he dressed her in a short skirt, and they went on a little adventure to a drive-in in the next county. She parked the car quietly in the back of the lot, lowering the seat so she could get comfortable as they laughed together. Charlie enjoyed teasing her with playful gestures, making her giggle and blush. After a fun evening, they shared milkshakes at a drive-thru, laughing when the young server got flustered over her leaning to reach her drink. The cold cup from the milkshake made her shiver as Charlie playfully brushed it along her arm. By the time they got home, their mood was lighthearted, and they went inside smiling, feeling closer than ever. The following morning, Charlie could still smell the vanilla shakes they had shared, and he couldn't help but laugh at the memories of their fun night out. They cherished those small moments, bringing them closer as they navigated their busy lives together. A few weeks later, she found herself in a different city, where her new office was located. She decided to treat herself to a night out in the bigger town, enjoying a fun outing. She ended up at a local show where the lively music and energy helped her unwind. The next morning, feeling slightly worn out from a late night, she chuckled to herself about how different it was from her usual routine. She missed Charlie and looked forward to getting home where she felt at ease. Throughout her busy travel schedule, she had her ups and downs, but always felt grateful to have Charlie to lean on. During each trip, she appreciated small, thoughtful gestures, whether it was a good meal, a quiet evening walk, or simply a phone call with Charlie to catch up. Sometimes she splurged a bit on small comforts like a nice dinner or a small keepsake, which she enjoyed sharing stories about when she returned home. As the years passed, she occasionally struggled with balancing work and personal life, but remained committed to keeping her relationship strong. She and Charlie worked through challenges together, learning to trust and support each other through the ups and downs. Their bond deepened over the years, with both finding comfort in the stability they brought to each other's lives. In the end, it was Charlie's kindness and understanding that helped them through any misunderstandings or challenges they faced. They realized that despite the occasional temptation and distraction, their shared life was worth every effort they made. They found joy in the little things, sharing laughs and memories that kept their connection strong. And while life continued to bring them new experiences and occasional challenges, they always came back to each other, choosing love and loyalty above all else. It was the first time she thought about having fun at home, and the years of keeping secrets from Charlie made her feel too confident. She wanted Bobby to be her helper, to take him with her on trips, and like before, only have her fun when she was away. They were sending signals to each other and the flirting picked up. She had met men like Bobby before, selfish and cocky. She felt sure he was after her and her money, and it made her smile. He would never compare to Charlie. Bobby was just someone to pass the time with until he got boring. She planned to end things nicely, giving him some nice gifts and maybe a little cash. If he got foolish and tried to push her, she'd make sure he knew it could cost him dearly. Things started to go wrong when his wife found their emails. How could he have been so careless? Rose realized she should have ended it right then, but he convinced her he could manage his wife. She didn't know what he was planning until everything began to fall apart, but the last thing either of them expected was for Amanda to reach out to Charlie. Rose paused, lost in thought while brushing her hair. Did she really want to stay married to Charlie? Was it time to just give up? Yes, the intimacy had not been special in recent years, but he felt safe and familiar, and when they were together, he always tried hard to make her happy. Maybe, she thought, if she had held back some of her attention from her other partners, things would have been better. Yes, she realized, she wanted to stay married to Charlie. He was her true partner, the one she wanted by her side in tough times. Life without him didn't seem right. She needed to show him that none of the others meant anything. They were just distractions until she could return to him. She had to make the effort. Charlie drove into the driveway of his farm, admiring the old farmhouse on the hill, looking over the land. When he first got the place, it was in rough shape, and he even thought about tearing it down. In the end, he chose to restore it, making many improvements. The project took 3 years because he had just started his business and couldn't afford to do everything at once. Rose was busy setting up her new office and didn't pay much attention to his work. Charlie suddenly realized that this was a good picture of their life together. Rose only paid attention when it involved her directly. Charlie felt a little let down when he showed her the place, and all she said was that it looked nice. He thought about making it their home, but his business was doing well, and Rose was starting to earn money from her job. She wanted to create something new, just for them and the children they planned to have. Rose wanted to wait until her job was stable, but when her profits appeared for the first time, she stopped using birth control. They married at 26, and now at 28, she told Charlie they needed to act quickly. She didn't want to still have babies when she was 35. They had agreed to have 3 children, but when Faith was born, things didn't go as planned, and she decided not to have more children. Charlie hoped for more kids and even mentioned adoption, but Rose changed the subject until he stopped asking. In Charlie's eyes, his daughter Faith was perfect. As Rose focused more on growing her business, he spent more time with her. He hated dropping Faith off at daycare. At the store, he had 5 women working full-time, including the manager of the hardware store and 4 part-time employees. 18 men worked in the commercial side, mainly as drivers and in receiving. When he built a new building next to the store, people didn't notice because he was always expanding. Many thought it was going to be an office. Once it was finished, he called all his employees for a meeting. "I know you've all been curious about the new building. It's a daycare center for Barton Enterprises. It's not open to the public and is only for employees." His employees were surprised, especially when he took them on a tour. The center could care for 50 children and had a playground and a fully equipped kitchen. One woman, already struggling with childcare expenses, asked what the costs would be. He smiled. "Well, it's completely free for you and there's an employee discount." It took them a moment to understand. Then some employees started to tear up. This gesture meant an extra $100 or more each week for them. However, Charlie did this to keep Faith close by. He hired 4 women and a part-time cook. The cook received clear instructions on the types of lunches and snacks to serve. They had to be tasty, healthy, and made with local ingredients, using as few pre-packaged items as possible. Soon, employees wanted to eat with their children, so he had to extend the cook's hours and set up more tables. When the number of meals reached 60, he hired her an assistant. Many of them enjoyed meals outside when the weather was nice, sitting at tables under the trees. Almost half of the meals were vegetarian, and no one complained about it. He had brought in professional caregivers, and while the kids played a lot, they also learned important things. By the time many of them started public school, they could read and write already. Most of them even knew some basic Spanish, and they developed good study habits. The school system called them the Bartonians, and they formed strong friendships that lasted for years. They also did well on the yearly tests, which helped boost the school's rating. From a young age, they learned to say please, thank you, and you're welcome, making good manners second nature. When his other stores found out, he had to set up similar programs for them, too. He spent about $400,000 a year of his own money to keep this going, though he did receive some tax benefits. All of this was because Charlie wanted Faith to feel happy and close to him. He unlocked the door and decided to open a few windows for some fresh air. The breeze felt nice, so he kept them open for the night. Normally, he didn't drink much, but he remembered to pick up a 12-pack of beer along with some coffee, cream, and snacks. He put everything in the kitchen, glanced at the beer for a moment, then made himself a cup of coffee. He took his coffee outside and sat in the porch swing, gently rocking back and forth. He suddenly remembered sitting with Rose on this same swing right after they finished the house. They shared some laughter and good moments there, thinking about the barn where they had spent time together. He smiled at the memory and leaned back to think, trying to find any signs that his marriage was ending. Looking back, he couldn't find anything obvious. Then he remembered a few smiles from Rose, and when he asked her about them, she had said she was thinking of a happy memory but never shared what it was. Was she thinking of someone else then? His thoughts were interrupted by a call on his phone. He had forgotten to turn it off but noticed the number. "Hello?" He heard crying before she managed to say that her husband had hit her. "Amanda," he said in his serious tone. "Who did this?" "My husband. I told him I was leaving and he got angry and hit me. What should I do?" "Are you safe?" She tearfully confirmed she was in her car. "Good. Now listen carefully. Drive straight to the hospital. I'll be there as soon as I can. Do this, Amanda, if you want my help. Go now." He ended the call, relieved he had chosen coffee over beer. Once in his truck, he called the sheriff's department non-emergency line. He spoke with the senior officer and was promised a female deputy would meet them at the hospital. He arrived at the parking lot just ahead of the squad car. Amanda quickly got out of the car and hurried over to him and the deputy. The left side of her face was swollen and her eye was shut tight. A small trickle of blood was coming from the corner of her mouth. They guided her into the emergency room and Charlie waited for 40 minutes until the deputy came back out. She was from Bartonia, one of the locals. "He's broken her cheekbone, Charlie. She wants to speak with you before she takes any action." "What is going on?" Charlie shrugged and told her a simpler version of the story. "I had lunch with her today. I guess she needed someone to talk to. Her husband has some strange ideas and was trying to involve her in them. I gave her advice that I don't think he liked." Carla Martinez laughed a little. "Strange ideas? Are you serious? In our small town?" She was surprised by the troubled look on his face. "Sometimes you don't really know people, Carla. They can surprise you in bad ways. Let's go talk to her." Amanda was on pain medicine, looking weak and pale. She tried to smile when she saw him, but grimaced in pain. "What should I do, Charlie?" "First, you need to file a report. If you don't, I won't be able to help you anymore. You didn't deserve this, Amanda, and you can't let him get away with it. Has he done this before?" She hesitated but nodded. "Not like this, but he has hit me a couple of times." Charlie looked at Carla. "Did you hear that? We need to do something." Carla looked surprised. Throughout all the years she had known him, dating back to when she was 8, he had never spoken like that. Her instincts as a police officer kicked in. She sensed there was more to this situation. "I can't do anything yet. First, she has to give a statement and agree to take action. Until then, we can't proceed. She has to be honest." Charlie looked at Amanda, realizing her safety was more important than anything else. "You will speak up, right? Anything you want to share, Amanda?" "But Charlie..." "No buts. Your safety comes first, okay? Now I will step out so you can talk to Officer Martinez. I'll be back to check on you when you're done." "Thanks, Carla, for helping me." He left, leaving the two women in the room. Carla worried about what was happening. If Charlie, whom she respected more than anyone, was involved with this young woman, it would be shocking. But her police experience taught her to be prepared for anything. 45 minutes later, she came back to the waiting room and gave Charlie a big hug when he stood up, not saying anything. When she stepped back, she was glad no one else was around. It's a typical case of a domestic argument. They fought and he hit her. That's all the report needs. Do you understand, Charlie? He held her hand. "Thanks for being so understanding. But if it comes down to it and you need to explain more to get a conviction, go ahead. How is she? Can she leave?" "No, she has to stay overnight for monitoring due to a possible concussion. She will need a ride tomorrow and a place to stay. We can arrange for her to stay at a shelter for a couple of days, but after that she'll have to find somewhere else. His father owns the house, so she can't stay there. However, she can go tomorrow to gather her things. I doubt he will be there, at least for a few days." He walked back inside, checked on Amanda, saw she was asleep, and left. What a day, he thought tiredly. When he got home, he set his alarm and quickly fell asleep. His eyes opened wide when the alarm rang. Surprised not to recognize the bed, everything came back to him. He took a shower, called his assistant, and told her he probably wouldn't be in that day. She was used to him needing to leave town at short notice, so she didn't think much of it. "Well, let's see. I just found out my wife has been unfaithful for who knows how long. Her former partner tried to convince his wife to betray him too so he could be with my wife. When she refused, they argued and he got angry. She's in the hospital, he's in jail, and my wife. I don't know or care, nor am I interested in finding out." He frowned at these thoughts. Charlie decided to stop at the diner for breakfast. He hadn't been there long when Officer Martinez walked in, finishing up her shift and stopping for a meal. She came right over to him, leaning down and giving him a friendly kiss on the cheek. The staff and other customers smiled as he turned bright red. It was well known how easily he blushed, a fact many of the local women found amusing, especially when their husbands were nearby. They did this out of kindness and humor, and everyone enjoyed the playful banter. She slid into the booth. "Buy a poor public servant breakfast, moneybags, and I want steak and eggs." He smiled as she placed her order. After the crowd thinned and she finished eating, she quietly updated him on her night. He was swearing and yelling when he opened the door, thinking it was Amanda. He stopped right away when he saw me and Officer Wells. Officer Wells was one of their largest officers, often called for domestic disputes. It was common to send a male and female officer to such calls. He started again when we handcuffed him, going on about Amanda, Rose, and you. We read him his rights and told him to be quiet. He was processed in about 4 minutes. It'll probably be 10 before his father can come with the lawyers. Amanda is still in the hospital and won't be discharged until after lunch, so she will need help to collect her belongings. The office has been informed, and if she gives them a 2-hour notice, she can pick things up any time in the next 48 hours. It's standard waiting time for a domestic abuse case. She has nowhere to go, Charlie. Her family lives 2 states away. Are you going to help her? Not directly. That would only make things worse. Come with me to the office before you head home. It won't take long. She followed him and waited outside while he went in. His assistant looked surprised when he said he had forgotten something. He opened the safe, took out $3,000, and walked back outside. Leaning into the window, he placed the small bag on the floor. Later today, have whoever is with her take her back to your apartment complex. There are a few police officers living there, right? Give her what's in this bag and tell her to keep it private. It's enough for her to find an apartment and cover her expenses for a month if she needs it. I owe you for this, and I promise to repay you in the future. Carla followed his instructions, and 18 months later, when she got married, Charlie walked her down the aisle. He paid for everything: the wedding, honeymoon, and even flights for her grandparents from Mexico. During their dance, he kissed her cheek, thanking her again for her support. Tears filled her eyes when he mentioned a perfect house for the young couple to start their life together, along with help for financing it. With Amanda safe, Charlie left to spend a few days at his farthest store. By the 3rd day, Rose had started to feel better. She didn't want to be a bother, so she called him once on his phone and sent 2 emails to his laptop and every store's desktop. She waited. 2 weeks later, she stopped exercising and gained 10 pounds. Her hair was messy and her outfits looked unflattering, so she decided to return to the gym. It was a trainer from her past who gave her the wake-up call she needed. When he pulled her into the office and sat her down, she opened up and shared everything. Well, Rose, what did you expect? You weren't too careful at first. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. What do you want to happen now? I want my husband back. Why? There was clearly something missing in your relationship, or you wouldn't have acted the way you did. Both of you are wealthy, so money shouldn't be a problem if you separate. Your daughter is grown, so she's not a concern. You can both go your separate ways and date whoever you like. But from what you told me, he seems like the kind of guy who wants a serious relationship. He might be married again before your divorce is finalized. I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, but I think he was just someone you were comfortable with. A backup between relationships. He paused, catching his breath. Now, wherever you end up, you need to pull yourself together. Get out there and work it off. I'm calling Gabriel. You could use a haircut, and I noticed some gray. I'll make sure he can see you in an hour. For the first time since that Thursday night on the patio, she smiled. What about dinner tonight, Eric? We could reminisce. Sorry, I can't do that. You're still attractive, but I'm married now, my 3rd time. I've promised myself that if this one doesn't work out, it won't be because I didn't stay faithful. From what you've told me, your husband is pretty traditional. Sooner or later, whether you get back together or not, he'll want to settle scores, and I prefer to stay away from trouble. If you have any friends, you should give them a heads up. I wish you the best. Now get moving. Rose thought about his words while she exercised. He was right. She should warn a couple of guys. The others were far enough away in her past that she thought they were safe. If Charlie ever found out she had been with 8 different men in the last 10 years, she would be in trouble. Yet for some reason, she couldn't shake off the love she felt for her husband and wanted him back. Charlie sat on the front porch of his farmhouse. He had been there for 2 weeks, and rumors were starting to spread. It didn't bother him much. He doubted anyone would confront him about it. The sheriff came by to chat. They were friends since childhood and usually took a couple of fishing trips each year, one to the coast and another to a lake known for big catfish. The sheriff even had a framed photo of them from a great trip, each holding a massive catfish. Sheriff Andy loved to remind him that his fish weighed 10 pounds more, over 70 pounds. Charlie made coffee, and they reminisced for a bit. Finally, Andy addressed the topic on his mind. "Charlie, people are starting to ask questions. You've been alone here for over 2 weeks, and Rose looks like she's struggling whenever she's seen. It seems connected to Amanda Peterson and her husband. He has charges against him, and Amanda is getting a divorce. Everyone is curious about how she can afford her lawyer. He's even threatening to make a claim against you if she doesn't back off. So, as a friend, what's going on?" Charlie shared his story, leaving out some details. Andy listened, stunned by what he heard. "So that's what's happening. Amanda opened my eyes, and while I don't like the situation, I'm glad she said something. I'll help her with the divorce as a way to say thank you. The closest we've ever been was when she kissed me on the cheek after she came out of the hospital. She's younger than Faith, so forget him. Tell him to do his worst, but remind him that if he pushes, I'll push back harder." As the sheriff drove away, he thought about how surprised he was that Rose would cheat on Charlie. He had known them since school and was the best man at their wedding. Faith called him Uncle Andy, and it took her a long time to understand he wasn't really her uncle. His daughter was her best friend. They even went to daycare together, and that helped save on childcare costs. The girls were inseparable until they went to college, but their friendship picked up again when they returned home. This situation would be tough on Faith. She would likely turn to Charlie for support since Charlie had practically raised her while Rose was focused on her business. Charlie was more well-known in the community than Rose, and the sheriff worried that if it came down to choosing sides, Rose would be left alone. He hoped it wouldn't come to that. This situation was shaping up to be a real mess. Rose felt stunned when she got the email. She had begun to think he would never reach out to her again. She expected a process server to show up any day. The email was brief but direct. "Why?" she replied with a long message expressing her love for him, how much she missed him, and asking him to meet in person so they could talk. He responded with another short message. "Why?" This went on for several days until he finally agreed to meet face to face, but only after she answered his question. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She must have rewritten her response many times. She even sought advice from a counselor and had a college student who was getting a master's in English help her refine her message. He was friendly and charming, and she felt awkward for a moment as she realized how young he was. She quickly dismissed those thoughts, gave him double his fee, and kept his contact information, feeling satisfied before sending her message. "Dear Charlie, writing this is incredibly difficult for me. How do you explain hurting the man who has been such a big part of your life for 30 years, the one who gave you a child, and the one who has loved you? You can't. I don't have a good reason. I've talked to a specialist a few times for help. I didn't agree with her views. She mentioned that things like hormone changes, a midlife crisis, and empty nest feelings might have played a part, but in the end, I made the choices I did because I could. I never showed it off, and until my recent mistakes, I kept it away from you. I knew how proud you are, and this would hurt you deeply. Your reactions so far have been just as I expected. I'm aware that with just a couple of phone calls, you could easily ruin my life and make me an outcast in our community. You might even turn our daughter against me. But I also believe you are a good person who wouldn't do something like that. If you choose to end our marriage, I know you will do it respectfully and quietly. I know you well, Charlie, but I need you to understand this, Charlie. I've never stopped loving you. Even when I was away, I always thought about coming home to you, nestling in your arms while we watched the sunset together. If I could change the past, I would erase all this pain and return to our peaceful, happy life. But I doubt I will get that chance. Please, Charlie, don't ask for details or timelines. I don't want to cause you any more hurt than I already have. The end would be the same whether it was one person or many. However, I want you to know that I would do anything to make things right again. If you want me to give up my job and stay home, I will sell my businesses right away, even at a loss. I would do anything, Charlie, just to be in your arms once more. Please tell me when and where you want to meet. I love you, Charlie. I always will. Rose. She sighed, hit send, and closed her laptop. Now it was up to Charlie and fate. Charlie read the email several times, feeling angrier each time. It felt like nonsense that she claimed those moments didn't matter and that her love for him was still there. The comment about 1 or 100 clearly meant there was more than one person involved, and that was all he needed to know. He decided to take a trip away from home to the largest city where his wife worked. He had his lawyer reach out and got the names of 3 well-respected private investigation firms in the city. He met with all of them and hired 2, wanting to cover all his bases. At every place she worked, he did the same thing, offering high pay and bonuses for quick results. His only instruction was clear. Find out everything you can about my wife's activities. If you need more help, hire it. If you suspect she has been unfaithful, gather as much information as you can and take it as far back as you need to. The owners of the 2 firms had dinner together. They were familiar with each other and felt a bit uneasy about the situation. "What do you think he's after, Jack?" one asked. "I don't think he's looking for anything specific," the other replied. "I believe he's a man in deep pain, trying to figure out why she was unfaithful to him." He paused, taking a sip of his drink. "I'm sure you looked into his background, just like I did, Chuck." He had no history of trouble and was a respected member of the community. It was hard to find anyone with a bad word about him, and those who did often faced consequences. Most of them probably deserved it. His kind acts were known around town, even if he preferred to keep them low-key. They sat quietly for a moment. He might look good on paper, but they had been in their jobs long enough to know that people often were not what they seemed. Plus, they both knew that someone who showed random kindness might have something deeper going on. Chuck finally spoke up. "Well, we know he's worth about $30 million, with at least 20 of that in cash, so let's keep an eye on him and do the work he's paying us for. If he goes off track, we'll handle it. And if it gets too intense, we call the authorities. Sound good?" "Absolutely," Jack replied. But both had doubts. Neither had seen such coldness in anyone's eyes as they did when Charlie discussed his thoughts on his wife. Bobby Peterson awoke in jail thinking, "This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I thought it was just some fun between us. No one was supposed to get upset." He couldn't believe it. His boss was showing interest in him. She was attractive for her age and had quite a lot of money. Bobby saw a chance and flirted back. When she called him into her office at the end of the day, he felt a rush of nerves. But nothing serious happened, just some clear flirting and friendly touches. He decided to be patient. As weeks passed, she flirted more openly, inviting him into her office and getting closer. They shared kisses and light touches. Just when things seemed to escalate, one of the secretaries walked in to grab her umbrella. Luckily, the office door was closed. Rose quickly adjusted her dress and suggested it might be best to stop for the day. She told him he could leave first, promising to lock up soon. He gave her a quick kiss as he left, pleased with himself. As he drove home, he felt confident about his chances with Rose. She often complained about long trips and demanding work due to the new office. Maybe she needed help, and he could fit that role. If they started seeing each other, they could save money on hotel costs. Bobby had a plan. His father had never respected him, always calling him lazy and uncreative, and he had even fired him for using petty cash for lunch. Bobby had used that money almost every day for a year before he got caught. Almost $2,500. He liked to eat at nice places. He tried to say it was for business, but no one believed him. His dad gave him a choice: pay back the money or leave. So, he left. He planned to win Rose Barton away from her husband and take his place in her life and with her money. That would make his dad pay attention. Sure, Rose was over 20 years older, but she was still attractive and, more importantly, quite wealthy. In a few years, she might slow down and he could find some younger friends. She might even be okay with it, wanting to take a break. When he had control of the money, he would show his dad he had it in him all along. Things went sideways when his wife became suspicious. Even though she wasn't very bright, she had a sense about these things and kept looking until she found emails. He turned on the charm, telling her he was only doing it for them and that he didn't really like Rose. It took some time, but she began to understand. He even suggested she find a wealthy friend, thinking it could be beneficial for both of them. Together, they could gather money to start a business. She could be his secretary, which was what she was studying for in community college before they got married. But he didn't expect her to try to seduce Charlie Barton. When he reacted poorly, she broke down and shared everything, including that Rose was taking her son Bobby to visit her out-of-state offices. She ruined everything. When she came home and told him she talked to Charlie to get his approval about the open marriage idea, he couldn't believe it. Charlie told her the truth, and Amanda decided to leave him. They argued while Bobby drank steadily. He knew he was in trouble. He was sure he would lose his job by Monday and might not find work in the community again. His dad would ridicule him, and he knew no help would come. He felt trapped. Amanda then said she would take everything from him before the divorce was done. He lost his patience and slapped her to quiet her down. Maybe he hit her a bit hard, but it made her stop. She walked away, leaving him alone. He went back to his gin, trying to clear his mind and think of a way to come out on top when it was all over. Maybe he could ask Charlie for a favor to keep the truth hidden. That seemed like a good idea. A couple of hours later, someone knocked on the door. Didn't they know it was late? "Go away, Amanda! I don't want to hear from you!" he shouted, thinking it was her. But when he looked, he saw it was 2 police officers. The police officer was very big. "Robert Peterson?" "Yeah. What do you want? It's late, and That's all he could say before they had him on the ground, putting handcuffs on him. "Robert Peterson, you are under arrest for hurting Amanda Peterson. You have the right to—" The female officer read him his rights, but Bobby didn't pay much attention. Was Amanda really going to have him arrested? It was just a small slap during an argument. "Wait a minute. It was just a little hit. Things got out of control when we argued. I didn't mean to hurt her. I bet Barton encouraged her to do this. Is it my fault that he can't make her happy? I hadn't even been with her yet." "Mr. Peterson, remember your rights. Anything you say can be used against you in court. We have body cameras, so everything you do and say is being recorded. It would be wise to stay quiet." There was something in the eyes of the female officer that made him stop. She looked really angry. He didn't say a word from then on during processing and when he was taken to his cell. His mood got even worse when he found out he couldn't get bail for at least 48 hours because it was a domestic case. Swallowing his pride, he called his father the next morning. After explaining what happened, he had to listen to his father laugh for a few minutes. Then his father said he would start the paperwork, pay for his release, and get a lawyer, but only if Bobby promised to pay him back. By the time he was released, Amanda had taken all her things and disappeared. No one knew where she was. Well, her lawyer knew. That woman had been waiting outside the jail to serve him papers. Amanda was on medical leave from her job until she healed, and they couldn't or wouldn't tell him anything. His lawyer warned him that he could face time in jail unless he could convince her to drop the charges. A few days later, he saw Charlie Barton on the street. They were both going to lunch at the same diner. Bobby watched as all the waitresses were friendly to Charlie. He joked with his waitress, "What do I need to do to get service like that?" The waitress glanced at his hand on her arm and he quickly moved it away. She gave him a big, fake smile. "Well, for starters, try not being known for hurting women. If you want service like Charlie gets, be a man everyone respects, and maybe tip better." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and they all laughed. He was about to argue with the waitress when the owner came over. "Enjoying your burger, Bobby?" Finally, someone nice. "Yeah, it's good, thanks." The owner smiled and looked down at him. "You're welcome, but if I were you, I'd enjoy every bite because it will be the last time you eat here. When you leave, don't come back. You're banned as long as I own this place. I was married once to someone like you. I don't want you here to remind me of bad moments." This time, the laughter was loud and he turned pale with anger. He couldn't believe it. He would show them one day. They would regret how they treated him. He glanced over at Charlie, who was sitting there with a slight smile. Bobby almost decided to go over and confront him when 2 policewomen walked in and approached his table. One was from the county and the other was from the city. The county officer took off her hat and set it on the table, then leaned over and gave him a kiss on the cheek. The city officer did the same to his other cheek. The people around them grinned, having seen this before, always laughing when Charlie turned red. They sat down, but the smile on the county officer's face vanished when she looked at Bobby. It was the same officer who had arrested him, and now she was being friendly with Charlie. She whispered something to the city officer, who shot him a cold look before returning to her meal, playfully teasing Charlie. When they left the checks on the table, and Charlie paid for everything, leaving a generous tip. Bobby took his time eating, feeling spiteful. He didn't leave a tip, but the waitress smiled and wished him well. As soon as he stepped outside, he spotted it. The big yellow boot was hard to miss. Then he saw the fire hydrant just 5 feet away from his front tire. Had that always been there? He picked the ticket off the windshield and walked to City Hall. $138, and now he would have to wait until 4 o'clock for someone to remove the boot. Great. He had to walk back to the office. Surprisingly, Rose hadn't fired him yet. No one had seen her for almost 3 weeks. They figured she was working at one of the other offices in a different state. Bobby kept quiet and focused on his tasks, hoping for a fair reference when it was time for the truth to come out. For 2 weeks, no one said anything at the office, and everything felt normal. Then the whispers began. No one wanted to make eye contact, and conversations became brief. He felt like yelling at them. This wasn't his fault. Bobby didn't realize it, but he had a distorted view of himself. His inflated self-esteem made him twist his past to fit his imagined future. He wouldn't admit to the truth unless he was cornered by his lies. Once caught, he would turn on his charm to deflect attention from his actions, and then he would start lying again. Even with his troubled relationship with his father and uncertainty about his job, he held on to the belief that he would somehow come out on top. Just as he was about to drift off, a thought struck him. Faith. She had shown him kindness years ago when she visited her mother's office during college breaks. He hoped he could win her over, maybe even convince her to marry him someday. That would show them. Sitting in the church while they exchanged vows would be just right. Feeling better than he had in weeks, he went to sleep. The next morning, everything returned. Faith was an attractive target. She was very pretty, looking like a younger version of her mom, tall with nice cheekbones. Every man around had shown interest, but none could make her settle down. She turned them all down, saying she wasn't looking for a relationship and wanted to focus on her new business. Her business was off to a great start, thanks to her family. The vet they had used for years was getting older and had to close his practice due to problems. Animals were getting sick, and complaints were piling up. He had to deal with rising insurance costs and legal fees, which forced him to shut down. Faith, her 3 assistants, and the older vet who worked part-time were very busy. Realizing she needed more help, Faith placed ads for another vet and ended up hiring a husband and wife team. The woman had experience working at a zoo, and soon they were caring for zebras, llamas, and other unique pets. This helped to build their reputation and increase their workload. Faith and the older vet also visited local farms for horse and cattle births and other tasks that didn't need office visits. In 2 years, her business was thriving, and she had almost reached her market limit. She thought about following her parents' example and opening more clinics, but she knew that would mean managing instead of treating animals, and that was not why she went to school. Charlie and Rose were proud of her, although Charlie mentioned that he would like to see more grandchildren. She promised him, with a kiss on the cheek, that she would let him know when the time was right. When things got too stressful, she would gather her single friends, and they would go to a bigger town for a break. They would get a couple of hotel rooms, visit the bars, and have some fun. Carla and Vicky, another single friend from law enforcement, would take turns keeping an eye on everyone. The others would relax, dance, and enjoy themselves. Sometimes one of them would meet someone new, but that wasn't the main goal. Once, Carla stopped a man from trying to give Faith a drink that was tampered with and had the bartender call the police. They tested the drink, and the man faced serious charges for his actions. Charlie made sure that the man would not have the chance to make that mistake again. He took a deal and ended up spending 8 months in prison out of a 3-year sentence. During that time, he had trouble with the other inmates and was hurt at least once a month. When he got out, he could barely walk and had trouble seeing from his left eye. He had also experienced how painful unwanted attention could be several times. 2 weeks later, he was hurt again and decided to move across the country. After that, no one heard from him again. Charlie felt a sense of satisfaction when he learned this. Faith had a tip from her friend at the shelter and wasn't surprised when Bobby brought in the cat. She was, however, taken aback by how well the cat reacted to him. Putting on her professional demeanor, she began filling out the needed forms. "What's your pet's name?" "Lady Gray," he replied shyly. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. He even turned a little red. It was the only name that felt right. She just looks regal, don't you think? Well, she thought, maybe there was a real person under there after all. And how old is she? 31? One of her helpers giggled. Not your age, Bobby. How old is your cat? He recalled what the shelter staff had said. A little over a year. Where did you find her? Was she a stray or did someone give her to you? It's a rescue. Faith smiled and paused her writing. You can take her home, Bobby. All rescued animals are spayed or neutered. Just make sure she has enough water, feed her well, take her for checkups from time to time, and give her some love. She'll be with you for years. Bobby felt his plans fall apart. He made small talk until she kindly said she needed to attend to other patients. He felt like she was laughing at him, which made him upset. Then he had an idea. He pulled over out of the sight of the clinic and let Lady Grey go. She would find her way back to the clinic and Faith would take her in and call him. He planned to return at closing time to win her over with his gratitude. Strangely, he felt disappointed and almost decided to go back. Forget it, it's just a cat, he told himself. Besides, he would get her back tomorrow. Faith recognized Lady Grey right away. The cat was standing by her barn, looking a bit confused. Come on, sweetie. Let's get you inside and get you something to eat. Lady Grey purred in Faith's arms and happily ate the food she was given while Faith completed her paperwork. She admired the cat's sleek coat but then remembered who owned her and frowned. Suddenly she picked up her phone and called. Hi, Mom. It's me. She pulled the phone away from her ear until her mom stopped excitedly chatting. Yes, I know it's been a while. I wonder what could keep an only child from seeing her parent. Oh, I remember. More excited talking followed until she spoke firmly. Mom, please listen. You and I are going to dinner tomorrow at China House, 7 o'clock sharp. I'll see you there. And Mom, we need to have a serious talk. Be ready for it. If I catch you trying to avoid any question, we won't talk for a long time. Keep that in mind. If you don't show up, I'll know everything I need to know. Good night, Mom. She turned off her phone while her mother continued talking. Picking up Lady Grey, she placed her in a container for the night. The cat meowed sadly, and despite herself, she took her out. Just for one night, don't get too cozy. Lady Grey purred happily in the passenger seat, jumping out and striding toward her apartment door as if she owned it. No loud noises. Be good now. It's time for bed. Faith settled Lady Grey in the utility room on a bed made of towels, leaving water and food beside her. The next morning, she woke up feeling strange to find Lady Grey on her chest, tapping her nose gently with a paw while purring. Faith groaned as she got up, carrying Lady Grey to the kitchen. What? Are you my alarm clock now? I usually sleep for 30 more minutes. Can you behave while I shower? Lady Grey sat and mewed while Faith took her shower. When Faith opened the shower door, she accidentally sprayed the cat with water. Lady Grey yelped and dashed into the kitchen. Faith laughed and finished rinsing off. In the kitchen, Lady Grey was on the table, cleaning herself and looking very unimpressed. Faith chuckled and picked her up, rubbing her tummy. Lesson learned, little one. Be careful, or you'll get wet. The cat walked out confidently and jumped into the passenger seat of the car like it was the most usual thing to do. At the clinic, she hopped out, acting like she owned the place. Who do we have here? One of the assistants asked as she picked up the cat and petted her. This is the lovely Lady Grey. I believe her owner will call soon. Please make her feel at home. Lady Grey tried to protest, but the assistant placed her in a container until lunchtime, when she could have some exercise. She found Faith sitting under a tree for lunch and immediately jumped into her lap, even nibbling on some of her tuna sandwich. The rest of the afternoon, she roamed freely, following Faith around as she worked in the barn, exploring here and there. Faith lost track of her for a moment, but found her curled up asleep on top of a young horse in one of the stalls. She took some pictures before carefully lifting the cat up. By the time Faith finished her rounds, Bobby had called. She returned the call, confirming she had his cat and that he could come by whenever he wanted. She spoke about how sweet Lady Grey was. Something in Bobby's voice seemed off, so she asked Nancy to stay close when he came over. Bobby, it turned out, was not in a good place. He had been helping a friend with some questionable money matters and had gotten involved with drugs. Bobby liked how it felt. It seemed to help him think better and be smarter. He never did it at work, maybe just twice at home or when he was out with a friend. Things had changed for him. He hadn't lost his job, but it was clear he couldn't work in the same office anymore. He was moved to another office, one she seldom visited. To make things easier, Rose made him the office manager and gave him a good raise. I'm trying to help both of us, Bobby. I can't stay in touch with you if I want to work things out with my husband. We both messed up, so if you're thinking of suing, you should think again. Amanda shared all our emails, and I can make it seem like a woman in a midlife crisis was fooled by a younger man. We'd all lose, but you'd lose the most. Just accept the promotion, work for a bit, and when you find a better job, you'll get a great recommendation and a good severance package. Feeling trapped, he accepted the transfer. Bobby felt pleased. His plan was coming together. He intended to charm her at the end of the day, hoping she would be eager to please him. To feel a bit more confident, he took a small dose of something to help him relax. The air felt bright as he approached the clinic door. She let him in without locking it behind them. He smiled as he saw her holding the cat. Nancy was in the office, observing their interaction. "Looks like you have a new friend. You've always been so charming," Nancy joked, seeing him as a bit silly. Faith smiled, but it didn't feel warm. "Bobby, I don't know what you're trying to do, so let me be clear. I've always thought you were kind of untrustworthy, even when I was younger. What you and my mother were planning makes me uncomfortable every time I see you. So whatever you want, you won't get it here. I suggest you take your cat and leave. Or better yet, leave the cat with me, and I'll ensure she finds a good home." He was stunned. She couldn't be serious. He was Bobby Peterson. Women didn't turn him down. "Come on, Faith, why are you being so harsh? I know you felt something yesterday. We could be a great couple." "Well, Bobby, let me think. What would I bring to the relationship? Looks, money, social status, and what do you bring? Someone on probation, just one mistake away from trouble? I don't see much of a future there." Bobby had faced legal issues before, but thanks to a skilled lawyer and no past troubles, he got probation instead of jail time. He had to do community service and attend anger management classes. He went to the classes, laughing to himself about how the leader, whom he thought was too self-important, could really believe what she was saying. He hadn't done his community service yet and thought he might ask Faith if he could do it at her clinic, hoping they could connect better. Her sarcasm only made him angrier. Before she realized it, Bobby was at the counter with his hand on her arm. She looked down and smiled. "You might want to let go of my arm and leave my office. This is your only warning." She was giving him that tight smile, looking at him like he was an animal on display. Without thinking, he pushed her, making her drop her cat. The cat, Lady Grey, reacted by clawing at his arm. He quickly removed the cat and threw it against the wall. The cat slid down, looking for a way to land safely. Faith reacted by hitting him as hard as she could, but it didn't free her. He pulled her over the counter, heading towards the door while shouting, "This could have been so much easier. Now I'll have to teach you the hard way." Faith was shouting and still hitting him. She managed to hit him in a sensitive spot, and he stiffened before hitting her face. Faith felt something in her nose hurt just before everything went black. Nancy had called for help as soon as he touched Faith. She rushed out from the back as he tried to drag an unconscious Faith through the door. She quickly used a tranquilizer dart on him. It was the first thing she saw as she came out. Sometimes, if an animal was hurt and wouldn't let anyone come close, they used the dart gun. Bobby yelled in pain and turned, hitting Nancy with one punch. He almost got to his car when the first police car arrived, blocking the way. Officer Wells jumped out, his weapon drawn. "Get on the ground! Do it now!" He still held Faith, using his hand to grip her throat. "Stay back or I'll hurt her. Move aside." By then, Carla Martinez had arrived. "Jimmy, if he puts any pressure on her, you take him down, okay?" She had her taser ready, moving to the side. "Don't move, you!" he shouted. Carla looked at Jimmy, silently asking him to distract him. "Hey, Bobby, I might not get to say this again, but thanks for being so foolish. Amanda and I are dating now. Did you know that? She said she wanted to be with a real man for a change. She is just amazing and is always interested in me. She says she didn't know what real love was until she moved on from you." Jimmy was just talking big. They were dating, but they hadn't gotten serious yet. They both knew it would happen soon, but they wanted to take their time. Carla was moving in the right direction when the tranquilizer hit. Bobby dropped Faith and collapsed to the ground. She used the taser on him anyway, just to be safe. It took 3 ambulances, one for Faith, one for Nancy, and one for Bobby, who was handcuffed to the stretcher. Faith was treated for her broken nose, a concussion, and bruises from being dragged across the ground. Nancy was checked for a concussion and kept overnight to be watched closely. Bobby was examined thoroughly, and they took blood samples. When cocaine was found, they got a search warrant for his house. They discovered his stash. He faced charges for possession of cocaine, breaking probation, assault, and cruelty to animals. His probation was canceled, and he was sent to jail. The bail was set so high that his father couldn't afford to pay it without losing most of his belongings. He ignored Bobby's calls. Rose waited at the restaurant for 3 hours. By the second hour, she was crying, worried that Faith had forgotten about her. It wasn't until she turned her phone on that she saw all the messages. She nearly fainted when she heard Charlie's last message. "Rose, where are you? Answer your phone. Faith is hurt and in the hospital. Bobby attacked her. It could have been worse, but the police arrived in time. He hurt her badly. Come here as soon as you can." She didn't know which hurt her more, the fact that Faith was hurt or that Charlie was so harsh. Rose didn't even remember driving to the hospital, but suddenly she was by Faith's side, distressed by her injuries. She leaned over her crying, her tears wetting Faith's hospital gown. When Faith woke up and saw who was with her, she wrapped her arms around Rose. They both cried for a few minutes before Rose stepped back, holding Faith's hand. "I'm sorry I couldn't make dinner, Mom," Faith whispered. "It's okay, honey. I'm so sorry about this," Rose said, her heart aching. Faith tried to comfort her. "No, Mom, it wasn't your fault. This was all Bobby's doing." Rose knew that wasn't entirely true, but she kept quiet. They talked for about 10 minutes until the medication made Faith sleepy again. Then, she felt a presence nearby and turned to see Charlie for the first time in almost 3 months. Her heart raced. He looked tired and worn, his face serious. She stepped in front of him. "Charlie, we need to talk. You promised you would if I answered your questions." He gently moved her hands away from his. "I will, I promise. But please give me another 2 weeks. I'll email you. I need to ask you a favor. Stay the night with Faith. I have some things to take care of, but I'll be back early tomorrow. Can you do that for me?" Wondering what was so important at this hour, she nodded. He left without saying anything more. Bobby slowly came to, confused about what had happened. As he tried to move, he realized his hands were bound to the bed. Memories rushed back, and a flash of anger surged within him. He thought she needed to understand respect. Then fear crept in as he remembered what had led him here. He was in serious trouble. Hearing a noise, he turned and saw Charlie Barton. It took a moment for Bobby's mind to clear, but soon he recognized Charlie. He seemed calm, watching him without any sign of anger, but there was something intense in his gaze that brought reality crashing down on Bobby's disoriented mind. He remembered everything: Faith, the police, the incident. "I'm in big trouble," he thought. "I could end up in jail. I can't go to jail. I need to contact my dad. He'll help me." He looked at Charlie again, wondering why no one was guarding the door. Charlie was steady, his eyes unblinking, like those of a hunter waiting patiently for the right moment. Bobby remembered a documentary he had seen about Nile crocodiles. They would remain still on riverbanks, then strike with incredible speed, pulling their prey into the water before anyone could react. It left a chilling impression. Suddenly Charlie moved, as if realizing that Bobby was awake. "Ah, Bobby, you're awake. I wanted to be the first face you saw. I also want to be the last before you sleep each night. 8 to 10 years, Bobby. That's how long you could be away from the outside world, according to the DA and my lawyers. That is, if you can keep yourself in check." He leaned closer to Bobby, who felt a rush of fear as he strained against the cuffs. Charlie spoke softly, but his words were sharp. "You have gone too far with my family. You touched my daughter, and that was a big mistake, Bobby. You hurt her. You really should have thought twice. Don't worry, there are consequences waiting for you. You're going to face a lot in there." Bobby struggled, trying to shout, but Charlie pressed a soft cloth over his mouth. Charlie continued speaking calmly as Bobby fought against his restraints. "Don't worry, Bobby. We'll help you find a good husband, and you'll be safe as long as you keep him happy. I'll assist you because I want you to remember to be grateful to me for helping you. Oh, and don't worry about them hurting your face. We need to keep you looking nice. They can put tattoos on your back, though, maybe on your arm. Anyone who sees you after jail will know what that means. It's like a badge, really. It'll show you're someone who lived through this. You might even get some offers. I might help arrange another marriage for you." Charlie leaned in closer. Bobby felt a tightening grip and realized Charlie had power over him. Bobby tried to scream into the towel, but his cries turned into whimpers until the pressure overwhelmed him, and he lost consciousness. His last memory was seeing Charlie's face. Charlie felt no guilt as he looked down. Everything he promised Bobby would happen, and he would make sure of it. He tossed the towel aside and left, thanking the nurse as he passed her station. He was still mostly out of it. I just wanted him to know that I understood it was the medication and held no grudges. I'll pray for him. The nurse listened and thought about how kind Charlie seemed. She knew she wouldn't have been so forgiving if it had been her daughter. Faith knew exactly where she was when she woke up. The hospital smells were familiar. She was surprised to see her mother by her side and felt a bit ashamed as she looked around for her father. She touched her nose, remembering what happened. Rose noticed the movement and woke up, tears coming to her eyes. They spoke, probably the most meaningful conversation they'd had in years. I guess I'm a bit like Dad in a way, Mom. Why is that? Rose looked at her daughter with sadness, a single tear rolling down her cheek. You think I haven't wondered about that many times in the last few months? I've talked to 2 different therapists, and they both mentioned something called success syndrome. As people gain wealth and power, they start to feel entitled, as if they can ignore the usual rules of behavior, thinking they deserve whatever they want. Rose sighed. I was mistaken. It became easier to think that way. I thought he must have figured things out by now, and if he didn't complain, it meant I could keep going. That led to arrogance, and being arrogant caught me. Faith stared at her mother for a moment. So, you're saying if you hadn't been so full of yourself and gotten caught, you would still be making bad choices? If you cared so much, why didn't you just get a divorce after I graduated high school? It happens all the time. I would have been hurt, but I would have gotten over it much better than this situation we're in now. Rose looked shocked. But I didn't want a divorce then, and I don't want one now. I'll change. I'll go back to being a good wife. Just give me a chance. Mom, come on. Listen to what you're saying. You need to move on. You got caught, and you practically said you've been unfaithful for a long time. Dad won't forgive you, and you know it. When he starts the divorce, just accept it and move ahead. You can be free to do what you want without worrying about being found out. I remember my psychology classes. Part of the excitement for you must have been that you were hiding things from Dad. I bet when you were home with him and you got close, you compared him to your other partners, and that made you feel something. Rose turned red, and Faith knew she had struck a nerve. Please, Mom, just let this go quietly. Don't make things worse for us. Keep some of our dignity. Then the doctor arrived, and their conversation came to an end. Charlie waited until Rose left before he went into Faith's room. He felt a wave of sadness. He had loved Rose for a long time, and he never imagined he would be in this situation. He put on a smile and opened the door. Faith smiled back at him. Even with her bruises, she looked lovely. You just missed Mom, she said. Her smile faded when he nodded. I know. Will you ever talk to her? Yes, soon when I choose the right time and place. Faith hesitated. I know it's not my place, but please don't be too harsh. Just let it go, Dad. Let her go. She isn't the same woman you married and hasn't been for ages. You're only 55. You can find someone else and be happy. For once, there was no happiness in his eyes when he looked at her. Faith felt scared. She had seen her father's darker side once when she was little. A friend had come to daycare with a bruise. She told her father about it at lunch. Later, she saw her dad, the daycare director, and a new staff member go into the office. The new worker had been struggling. Faith had wandered away during playtime to ask if she could invite some friends for dinner. She noticed her father and the man go behind one of the storage buildings. When she arrived, the man was unconscious. Her dad stood there, rubbing his hands, then lifted him up, woke him, and whispered something to him. Faith quickly turned around and ran back to the daycare, keeping what she had seen to herself. Mom asked about the scrape on his cheek and the black eye. He told her he accidentally dropped a couple of bags of fertilizer, and she lectured him about being more careful and letting the people he paid do their jobs. Juanita missed almost a week of daycare before returning, excited to share news. Her father had been living in the country without permission and had been picked up and sent back. Her mother and the rest of the family were also at risk until Charlie helped them by sponsoring them and getting his lawyers involved for green cards. He even hired Juanita's mother to help with lunch and support the teachers. When he found out she used to teach second grade, she spent many afternoons giving basic Spanish lessons to the older kids. After Charlie's visit, Faith rested and thought back to her childhood. She realized that many of her happy memories were tied to her father, while her mother was more of a background figure. She noticed her mother started to fade from her life around the time her mom opened her third office. It became routine for her to rush in, give a quick kiss, and then leave for her home office, often ignoring Faith's attempts to talk about her day. With her mother mostly absent, her dad became the main caregiver. This made Faith cling to him more. She knew if she hadn't been so dependent, he might not have added the daycare centers to his work. He was a great parent and seemed to know what she needed. It wasn't until her first year of college that she discovered he had conversations with daycare staff, her doctor, and child experts to ensure he was doing the right things. It wasn't only about education. She thought about how she filled the roles he missed. The tough tomboy, the fancy young lady, and sometimes even the son he wished for. He taught her to fish, and she even learned to hunt. Charlie still kept a photo in his office of her with the first deer she had taken when she was 12. He shaped her into the person she was now, confident but fair, loyal to friends, and true to her beliefs. Although she tried to hide it, she could be tough on her enemies when she had them. Charlie understood this, but Rose didn't see that money wasn't everything to Faith. Even though Faith grew up with everything she wanted, she never let money control her. Occasionally, she would indulge in something extravagant, but it didn't last long before she returned to her grounded self. When she graduated from vet school, her dad took her for a drive, stopping at a field halfway between their small town and the county seat. He handed her a deed. "I bought this for you. Take it down to Jerry's office to take care of the paperwork." Jerry was his lawyer. 26 acres. That should be enough space. You can build a clinic, a small barn, paddocks, and kennels, everything you need. The money will be available, but I won't get involved further. It's up to you to make it succeed. She felt touched and thankful. He welcomed her hugs and tears, smiling at her joy. They walked around the property as she talked about where to put everything, asking him for advice. He just smiled back. Get a good architect and listen to what they say. On the way back to town, Charlie shifted the conversation to money. "You are my only child. Apart from a few small things, you will receive everything when I'm gone. Your mom has her own business, so she doesn't need anything. I'm sure you'll inherit her assets, too. You'll be the richest person around. Be careful, though. There will be people looking to take advantage. Keep your wits about you, and you'll be fine." Faith thought a lot about money while her clinic was being built. It would cost $800,000 when finished, and the deed would be completely hers. At first, she relied on the lawyers and rarely consulted Charlie because she wanted to do it on her own. Once the clinic was running and helping clients, she stepped back and enjoyed her life. By the 10th month, the clinic was doing well. After the first year, she had to hire more staff. Soon, she even had to bring on more people. She started turning away customers because she wanted to provide the best care possible. For a moment, she thought about opening another clinic, but then she remembered her mother. No, she decided, this one was enough. When it came time for a family, she wanted to be there for her children. Faith understood that when she found a partner, he would need to be strong enough to handle her strong personality. So far, no one she dated seemed to fit that description. The two private investigators met again at the end of their 10 weeks of work. They had uncovered a few secrets and found 5 past relationships spanning 6 years. Chuck frowned as he looked at the last 2 cases, relieved he didn't live in that area. "You know he's going to be upset when he sees this." "I know I would be." Chuck nodded. "You're right, but this is what he paid for. I don't plan to hold anything back. I definitely don't want any trouble coming back to me." "Me neither. Let's make the call." They met in Chuck's office. After assuring the client they didn't work together but came to similar conclusions on their own, they handed over their findings, both on disc and in print. It filled 4 large boxes. The client listened quietly as they presented their reports, thanked them for their work, paid them, and left. Both were secretly relieved to see him leave, making a note to watch the news and read the papers closely. Charlie returned to the farm, brewed a pot of coffee, and started going through the files. He tried to stay calm because, aside from the names, he had prepared himself for this moment. But when he reached the name of the second most recent partner, he lost his composure. In frustration, he threw his coffee cup against the wall. His hands trembled for a moment, but he took a deep breath, composed his expression, and began to think. Rose sat at the conference table, her hands shaking so much that she gripped the edges to steady herself. The meeting with Charlie was finally here. She knew the chances of a happy outcome were slim, but she still held on to hope. Charlie insisted that the lawyers wait outside. He wanted this final meeting between them to be private. He had to acknowledge that she looked good, easily appearing to be 15 years younger. Her skirt, while modest, was a bit short. She had always known how to catch his attention. The blouse was suitable, just revealing enough to suggest her delicate undergarments. Her hair was styled in a way he hadn't seen in years, one he knew he liked. He had to give her credit for trying. When she moved to greet him, he stepped to the other side of the table. That did not bode well, she thought, but she smiled at him. "Hi, Charlie. How are you?" He replied politely. "As well as can be expected, Rose. I have to say you really made an effort today. I appreciate it, though you've always looked good to me." Rose smiled at the compliment. "Yes, I dressed to make you happy." "Thank you for that." He placed a thick packet on the table. Rose frowned. This was not going as she had hoped. He sighed, knowing it was time for their final conversation. "If you remember, I asked you about your past relationships, why, how long, and how many partners you had?" Charlie held up a thin folder. "This is what you sent me." He then opened a much thicker file. Let's see how well they compare. Rose felt a wave of panic. It was as if she could hear the door to her marriage closing. She waved her hand when she regained her composure. "There's no point. You knew I wasn't telling the truth when I sent that. Why go over it again?" Charlie ignored her and read the name of her last partner. "Bob Walton, 40, married, with 4 kids. He owns an insurance agency, the same one you switched your office coverage to after your first meeting. Ever wondered what they think of you? Listen to this." He pressed a button, and a recording began to play. "Yeah, I was with her. For her age, she was okay. I had some fun, but without the business connection, there's no way I would have been interested. More like a creature on the verge of disappearing." Rose felt a chill run through her at his words. Before she could gather her thoughts, Charlie went on. "It was tough to watch. I visited him 2 weeks ago and we had a talk. He got so upset that he almost lost his lunch. I mentioned I might open an office nearby, either next door or across the street. I told him that if he charged $100 for coverage, I would offer the same for $50, even if I had to cover the difference myself. I planned to offer an even bigger discount if clients left him to come to me." Charlie smiled a little as he remembered. "It was almost sad to see a grown man cry and plead. I made a deal with him. I said if he brought his wife to the office and admitted the truth, I might go easier on him. It was awful, Rose. She brought their 5-year-old because he called it an emergency. I had someone take the child for ice cream. Watching her hurt as he confessed nearly broke my heart. At the end, she begged me not to ruin him, to think about their kids. I found it telling. Her kids, not ours." Rose touched her throat, horrified at what she was hearing. "Don't worry, Rose. I didn't open that agency. I heard they're separated now. He's living in a small room at his office. Maybe they'll reconcile. Who knows?" Charlie arranged some papers and mentioned the man's name. He had managed to get him fired and mostly out of the picture. The man moved 400 miles away to start anew. "He was already divorced, Rose. It seems you were just one of several. I truly hope you were careful. I got tested 2 months back just to be safe. I'm still fine, but you know, some things take longer to show up." Rose didn't know how to tell him that she had a doctor at another office who checked her every month. After the meeting, she noticed he had missed 1 appointment. Thank goodness. Things could have been much worse. But then again, it wasn't a full-blown affair, just a brief encounter. He continued talking about her trainer. "I kind of respected him, Rose. He was honest, didn't try to dodge the issues. He said, 'She made the first move. I just got out of a tough breakup where she cheated on me. I felt a bit unsure. We were together maybe 6 times, I won't lie. Back then, she was quite skilled. I know how this goes. I've heard the rumors. Would you do me one small favor? I'm in business with two partners. If you ruin my reputation, you ruin theirs too, and they don't even know your wife. Let me sell my share to them, protect them, and then I can leave with my wife. I'm going home as soon as you leave to tell her everything. She loves her job and has a good chance of succeeding. If she decides to stay, I'll understand. I just needed to share this with you. I don't know you well, and I don't like what you're planning to do, but Rose had good things to say about you. She visited me a few weeks ago to seek advice. I told her to let you go, but I don't think she took my advice. Please stop this with me. Don't seek any more revenge. Even now, I believe it has changed you in a negative way. Don't be too hard on yourself. Try to find some peace in your life. Rose, you were right. Hurting those people didn't really make me feel better. I stopped and let the trainer be. Hurting them didn't help me deal with your betrayal, so I'm done with that. It's over. The way they described the woman they were with doesn't match the woman you were at home. You've made it easy for so long that I can never trust you again. Jerry has the papers ready. It's pretty straightforward. You keep what you gained from your business, and I'll keep mine. It's all written in the agreements. You can have the house. The farm works for me. I prefer no shadows and no memories. I've changed my will, and now Faith will get everything. You don't need it. I had your finances looked into. Congratulations, Rose. You were always good with money. We're finished. It will be a long time before I see another sunset without thinking of that night. Before I go, if you want to say something, now is your chance. He waited patiently while she gathered herself. I'm so sorry, Charlie. Even now, I don't understand why I acted the way I did. I still want a life with you, but I know that can't happen anymore. I wake up at night and reach for you, and when I remember, I cry all over again. I want to make you an offer that I have thought about a lot. I won't fight the divorce. You deserve it. But if you ever need me for anything, call. Anything, okay? I want you to promise that if you haven't met anyone new in 2 years, you'll think about going out with me again. No strings attached, just two people trying to see if they could be together. Can you promise me that? No, Rose, I can't promise that. I can only promise that when the time comes, I'll consider it. That's the best I can do. Goodbye, Rose. Charlie left her weeping at the table. Jerry and her lawyer had reviewed the agreement, believing it was best for everyone involved. Rose didn't read it. She just signed where instructed. The next day, she called Faith, who came over and stayed for a week, comforting her during those first few days of tears. At times, Faith would visit her dad at his office and farm. He seemed a bit emotional, but was doing okay overall. Faith realized his pain ran deeper than her mother's, and she kept a close watch on him. So there it was, a fairy tale life shattered. But time goes on. Rose dedicated herself to her business and in 6 years expanded her offices significantly. She was more open now and no longer felt the need to hide. Though she preferred younger companions, she understood them well and kept things focused on her interests. At 61, she surprised everyone by marrying a man who was nearly 70. She gave her old house to Faith and moved into his small mansion. There were whispers in her offices about their relationship, suggesting that while they appeared to be in love, he faced challenges and didn't mind if she had quiet meetings with others from time to time. Faith would sometimes check in on her father, but she was busy with her own business and had met someone special. He sold veterinary supplies, mostly online, but every few months he traveled for about a week to visit the places he worked with, to see what they needed. He was tall and handsome, with a gentle approach that both animals and people responded to well. He also seemed very strong. Faith was working with a stallion that was acting out because he could sense a nearby mare. When the horse raised his head high, he nearly lifted her off the ground. Just as the stallion was about to run off, a strong hand grabbed his halter. The horse tried to shake free, but the grip held firm. The man kept talking calmly, and soon the stallion settled down. She called Nancy and her groom to take the stallion back to his stall. "Thank you," she said, extending her hand. "He was pretty excited. You really saved me. I'm Faith." "Charlie," he replied, a strange look crossing his face. "And don't underestimate yourself. The halter would have had to break before you let go." "Besides," he said, smiling and still holding her hand, It's not just animals. Look at how silly people act around someone they're drawn to. Faith felt herself blush, realizing he was still holding her hand. His handshake was firm but friendly, and she could feel warmth from his grip. He eventually let go. "Nice to meet you, Faith. I need to get back to work now." He walked into the clinic, smiling confidently, his steps sure and purposeful. After completing her tasks, Faith felt a bit annoyed to see her assistant at the counter, chatting with Charlie. And here she is. "Faith, meet Charlie. He supplies most of our materials. He comes by sometimes, but you missed him last time when you were out delivering a colt. Charlie, this is Faith, the owner and head vet." "We've met," he said, offering his hand again. "How about lunch? I'm new here and don't know the best spots. Plus, we can write it off a salesman visiting the owner." Heather waited, expecting Faith to respond as she usually did, having turned down many men, customers, and salespeople with the same offer. Shock didn't quite capture what she felt when she heard Faith ask for a moment to get ready. She liked his truck, an F-150 with a secure cover for the back. He noticed her glance. "I prefer bigger vehicles. It gives me space to carry more samples and papers." This led them to chat about new medications available. He surprised her by mentioning that his company created brochures with information about various procedures and surgeries. These brochures could help people understand care tips for their pets, the diseases they might face, and the warning signs to look out for. They arrived at a diner and parked next to another truck that looked similar. It was an F-250, almost identical. Faith smiled. She took his hand and headed straight for a table. A man in his late years was sitting there with a much younger woman who appeared to be pregnant and was speaking rapidly. She paused as they approached. "Hey, Carla, just one more month to go?" "Carla, this is Charlie." She turned to the older man. "Dad, meet Charlie, my future husband. And Charlie, meet my dad, your future father-in-law." Everyone but Faith looked surprised. "Just kidding. Seriously, Charlie, this is my dad, and Dad, this is my lunch date. Charlie, what's the special today?" They all calmed down. Carla and Faith chatted nonstop about the baby, while the two Charlies discussed a variety of topics, landing on business last. Charlie Sr. was keen on offering a line of do-it-yourself pet care products. When Charlie the Younger learned that he owned 4 possible stores for his products, he was stunned. Faith suddenly clapped her hands on the table, capturing everyone's attention. "Enough talk about babies and pets. What's for dessert?" "Mary made banana pudding, but it's almost gone. I saved one for Carla and me when we got here, but you guys might miss out," Charlie Sr. said with a smile. If Faith learned that Mary had banana pudding before she sat down, she would have ordered every serving available. Faith was very disappointed. Mary made the best banana pudding around and even won a fair ribbon for it. However, she gave her last big serving to Charlie as a playful tease. Charlie quickly passed Faith a spoon, and they shared it, letting her enjoy most of it. The next time they had lunch again without Charlie Sr., as it was his week to travel. Carla was out showing off her baby, who wouldn't stop crying. Charlie took the baby gently from her and walked him around, softly soothing him. In just a few minutes, the baby quieted down and soon fell asleep. The other diners watched, both amazed and entertained, as he carefully returned the baby to his carrier. Seeing the surprised looks from Carla and Faith, he smiled. "It works with puppies, so why not with babies?" Faith gave him a big kiss on the cheek. "Just so you know, when our kids get sick or are teething, you're going to be the one who loses sleep. I'll just nudge you awake and turn over." Charlie smiled and said that if he got to help create the babies, it would be worth it. Faith turned red while Carla and another woman giggled. The third time he visited, they had lunch and dinner, plus a sweet moment together. They talked and texted all the time, and on his next visit, he didn't make any plans to stay overnight. Faith arranged not to be disturbed until Monday. Their time together was wonderful. He treated her with great care, and she discovered all his special spots. They connected in many places around her home, and late Saturday night, she took him in her truck to the farm, asking him to be quiet and help her with the quilts. Charlie, who was a light sleeper, heard them arrive. Grabbing an old item he had kept for many years, he quietly slipped out a side door and approached the barn door. Recognizing her truck, he stood beside it for a moment until he heard a few giggles. Smiling to himself, he went back inside the house and returned to bed. The next morning, the only sign he noticed of the visit was that the hay doors were open. He laughed as he shut them, remembering it was a full moon the night before. Once word got out that Charlie was single again, invitations began to pour in. He received offers for country club events, dinners, and even a cruise. He smiled politely and turned them all down. Women of all ages made their pitches to him. At first it felt too soon. Then it became a game. He would announce where he planned to have lunch, knowing his assistant would tell her friends, then he would go somewhere else. The places he skipped often saw an increase in healthy meal orders. He even put up a fence and a gate at his driveway, giving controllers only to himself and Faith. That didn't mean he didn't enjoy himself. He often dated while away on business trips. He was so impressed by one woman that he took her to the farm. 2 weekends later, he overheard her on the phone talking about all the changes she would make if they got serious. He decided never to see her again. 10 months before his 60th birthday, he heard a buzz at the gate. He felt a bit annoyed by the interruption and answered shortly on the radio. "Who is it?" "It's your cousin Cindy. Please open the gate quickly. My car might break down any minute." "I don't remember a cousin named Cindy." "By marriage, not blood. I'm Devin's wife. I have kids with me. Are you going to let me in?" He frowned. Devin had tried to take advantage of him in the past, but Cindy didn't say anything bad about him, and she did mention the kids. He decided to open the gate. A faded old minivan pulled up beside his truck, making strange sounds as if it could stop at any moment. 3 kids jumped out, asking where the bathroom was. A young girl, about 13, came out, and he was surprised by how much she looked like Faith at that age. She was holding the hand of a small girl who looked about 3. Cindy was the last to come out, clearly nervous. She took a deep breath and straightened up. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I'm really struggling here. Devin did something similar to me as he tried to do to you. The difference is, he got away with it with me. He took our good car and grabbed all the money he could, then vanished. I could only keep my rings because they were still on my finger. I managed to sell them for gas money. I didn't expect the gas mileage to be so bad, and it took everything I had to get here." The little girl started to fuss, and the 13-year-old directly asked Charlie for some food for her sister. He was shocked to learn that none of them had eaten since lunch the day before, and now it was dinner time. He led them to the kitchen. "I have cheese and crackers. Give those to snack on. Here, give the little one some cereal. It will fill her up faster. Your mother and I will handle dinner." He had planned to smoke a pork loin, but instead he cut it into pieces and grilled it. One of the neighbors had given him a dozen ears of corn, so he put those on the grill too. He assigned Cindy and Faith to make tea and lemonade. Cindy found some cabbage and made slaw, while Faith microwaved potatoes. In about 45 minutes, everything was ready. He felt anger towards his cousin as he watched the kids eat eagerly, worried about when they might eat again. After they finished, he went to the barn and made a phone call. The new county sheriff was John Goins, a retired SBI agent. With great qualifications, he was just unfortunate to be a Democrat in a strongly Republican county. Still, he had done better than Sheriff Andy Rogers in his first run. Maybe next time people would be open to a change. 10 months before the next election, Charlie decided to visit John. Straightforward, he asked if John was thinking about running again. "I want to, but I'm not sure I'll have enough support this year." "Look me in the eye, John. Tell me you are a good man, one who will follow the law fairly, a man who wouldn't betray a friend." "I'm your man, Charlie." "I don't want you to be my man, John. I want you to be the county's man. I need you to talk to the campaign planners I brought here and get back to me. That's all I ask." He got into his truck and drove off. The men he wanted John to talk to were used to working on larger campaigns and guided him on what he needed to do. John reviewed the plan. "This is going to require a lot of money I'm unsure I can gather. It's all been arranged. 4 different groups have already given a lot of money, and more will come along with individual donations. You don't need to worry about that." "Why is he doing this? If he wants someone to control, I'm not interested." "He didn't say. All he mentioned was that he wanted you to be sheriff. I've been around a long time, so don't turn down a good offer. I think it might be personal between Charlie and Andy, but I won't ask unless it affects your chance of winning the election. Now listen closely." Suddenly, billboards appeared everywhere. Sheriff Andy wasn't worried. He had beaten John Goins before. However, people he thought would support him, even some who weren't Democrats, rallied behind his opponent. Andy still wasn't too worried. He had Charlie Barton in his corner. Charlie had spent a lot of money on his last campaign and had spoken to many voters, bringing them to his side. It might be a closer race this year, but he was still confident. No one in their right mind would run against Andy in the primary, and John won his race easily, defeating his closest challenger by over 10,000 votes. Charlie hadn't come forward yet. Andy, feeling more anxious than he wanted to admit, decided to visit him. Charlie was waiting on the porch. Andy was surprised to see kids playing nearby on what looked like a new swing set. He had a little girl on his lap, gently swinging her to help her nap. A teenage girl stood nearby, ready to take the child once she fell asleep. Charlie called her over. "She's asleep, Faith. You can take her inside and ask your mom to bring out a couple of glasses of tea, okay?" "Yes, sir, Charlie," she replied with a smile. Andy felt he recognized her from somewhere. He settled into another rocking chair and thanked the woman who brought the tea. A lovely woman, maybe in her late 30s or early 40s. After she left, he grinned at Charlie. "You sly dog. She might be a bit young for you, don't you think?" Charlie frowned. "That's Devin's wife and kids. He left them, so she came back here. This is as far as she made it. I took them in for a while. There's nothing going on, and I don't think she even likes me. What brings you by, Andy?" Andy took a sip of tea, pleased with how good it was. "Well, if she cooks as well as she makes tea, you might want to keep her around." When Charlie didn't react, Andy got serious. "Johnny Goins is gaining a lot of support, Charlie. He's getting some real backing. It's time to bring out the big guns, meaning you. You need to speak to some of those guys and bring them back to help. Plus, I need a bit of money for the campaign. Those billboards and banners aren't cheap. How in the world did he raise funds for TV ads? Those costs are outrageous." This was an important hint for Andy. In private, the more angry he got, the more worried he was. "I can tell you a way to save a lot of money, Andy." "How?" "You can step down. When your term is over, you won't be in public office here again." Andy was shocked. "How do you know this?" "I know this, Andy, because I set it all in motion. Johnny will have my support and my funds. I'm even going to do TV ads with him. And all the money I gave to your campaigns, I'm putting even more into this one." "You're finished, Sheriff Andy." Andy sat there, his glass of tea half raised and forgotten, staring at Charlie as he tried to understand what was just said. A million questions raced through his mind before a few finally came out. "Why would you do this? We've been friends our whole lives, like brothers. We protected each other in tough times, even took blame for each other. I was there with you during your first big moment. We supported each other when we got married. 50 years of friendship, Charlie. What made you turn against me like this?" One of the private investigators Charlie had hired to look into Rose had connections in the local police department. One officer worked special cases, especially in high-end hotels, and he showed him a picture of Rose. He was surprised by what the officer said. "I know her. She has a flower name. Iris? Daisy? Oh, Rose. I don't recall her last name. She stays at the Towers. At first I thought she was looking for attention. Lots of guys dream of older women, you know? But she's some sort of executive, seems wealthy. For her, it's all just fun." Chuck asked if the officer remembered the last time he saw her. "I've seen her the last couple of months, but she always seems to be by herself. Looks like she had to take a break from her fun. I think she might be married. Maybe her husband found out about her lifestyle." "Anyone before that?" The officer laughed. "Yeah, funny story. She was alone, dressed to impress. Dim lighting helps with age, you know? Anyway, there were about 50 cops from the area there, relaxing after a seminar. A few of them tried to talk to her, and she flirted a bit, but I don't think any of them were really serious. I was chatting with a local sheriff, and I pointed her out to him. He jumped up like he was surprised. Soon she called his name, and he sat back down. After that, it was like they were the only two in the bar. It got so intense that we had to tell them to move somewhere else or take a break. They were on the elevator in 2 minutes. "So then," Chuck said, "it was a night for new chances?" Charlie turned off the small recorder and looked at him. Andy leaned back, looking worried. "Charlie, listen. It was a one-time mistake. We didn't mean for it to happen. We woke up scared and promised we would never hurt either of you again. Please, Charlie. Please forgive me." So it was just a one-time mistake? You were drunk and in a strange place? You didn't plan on it becoming something more serious? That's right, Charlie held up his hand and turned the recorder back on, continuing from where he had paused. The investigator's voice continued. So it was just a one-time encounter? The officer chuckled. Not at all. He didn't leave her room the whole weekend and even stayed an extra day. He had his deputy move in the last night, probably to avoid extra charges. I think his name was Wilson, or Warren, something like that. He was huge, over 6 feet tall. Andy slumped down, looking pale. He tried to say something, but Charlie stopped him. I don't care how it happened. She probably came on to you. But Andy, you were my best friend. Even if you were drunk, you should have known better. You had to know how I'd react if I found out, and you did it anyway, all weekend long. We're done, Andy. Don't come back here. Don't talk to me unless it's about work. Think about your future after you leave this job. You won't find another public position in this county. Think about what you'll tell Margaret if this comes out, and how the people here will see you. Face the truth, Andy. Your career is over. Leave quietly with some dignity. Now go. We're finished here. Andy stumbled off the porch, sat in his car for a moment, then drove down the driveway for the last time. Cindy walked around the porch with a pitcher of tea. Was the sheriff upset when he left? Just a little dust, Charlie replied. Grace, the 3-year-old, came out behind Cindy. She tapped her mother's leg to get her attention. Charlie, cuddle, she said. He laughed, picked her up, and moved over on the swing to make room for Cindy. Don't get too close, Charlie. We'll be leaving soon. Charlie smiled. You keep saying that, yet here we are. What are you doing with the money you've been earning? I know you registered the kids at school using this address. Her temper flared a bit. If I had enough money, we'd go now. You got us stuck here like Devin. This hit him hard at the end of a long day. He got off the swing and went inside. 5 minutes later, he returned with a check and handed it to her. She looked at it, then back at him in shock. It was made out to her for $5,000. Stop by the Jeep dealership on your way to deposit this. I asked Vic to find you something used and reliable. Just take whatever he offers. Use this money to get settled. You can start at the store next Monday. It won't pay a lot, but it will help with bills, and the kids will get free daycare. Do you think you can be ready by Friday? Cindy was taken aback. This was not the response she expected. She thought she might stir him up a bit and get him to notice her more. While she thought about what to say, she heard a sob and turned to see her daughter, Faith. Charlie had reacted when she introduced her, and she had smiled. Yes, I borrowed her name because I always liked it. I thought it stood for my future. I really got that wrong. Faith and Grace, the youngest, had really connected with him. They were at the age where they needed a father figure. Charlie even took Faith with him sometimes to visit his daughter. Faith met Charlie a few weeks after learning about his guests. She smiled when she was introduced to the new Faith and observed how much the girl looked like her at that age, even finding an old photo album to show her. Well, to avoid any mix-ups, I'll call you Faith Jr. when I'm around, okay? As time passed, she became known simply as Junior, and she beamed every time someone said it. She was excited when Faith promised her a part-time job next summer when she turned old enough to work. Cindy turned back to Charlie, her voice gentler. It doesn't have to be right away. We don't need to rush. You're right. I was getting too close. It will be harder for me when you leave. Speaking of spending time together, I told Hope and the twins we'd go fishing today. Maybe we can catch enough for a fish fry tomorrow. I need to get everything ready. He left her sitting on the swing. She sat with her head in her hands, listening to Faith busy in the kitchen. Hope was her 11-year-old daughter, and the twins were Jack and Jesse, who were 9. He'd taken them to the store and got them simple fishing rods and a filled tackle box. They drove to his old house, which was now Faith's, to visit the lake he built years ago. The younger Charlie was awake, and they all walked down to the lake. Soon the kids were holding their fishing rods, watching the bobbers closely. Faith went back to the house and returned with drinks and folding chairs for the adults. She was the only one who got to sit and relax while both Charlies kept busy baiting hooks and taking off fish, patiently teaching the children. They stayed for 2 hours, catching plenty for the fish fry. The twins teased Hope because they caught more fish, saying girls couldn't fish as well as boys, but then Hope's rod started to pull down hard. After 20 minutes of coaching from both Charlies, Hope landed an 8-pound catfish, which was much bigger than what the boys had caught. Faith recorded everything on her phone. Faith, a senior, suggested they have the fish fry at her house since they had done all the work catching the fish. She noticed her father's worried look and pulled him aside. "It's time to let go of the past, Dad. Let's make some new memories. Bring the rest of our family by tomorrow and let them enjoy the patio. In a few years, you'll remember moments like when Jesse had too much ice cream, or when you watched your first grandchild take their first step. And you'll see that Junior and Hope have grown up." He smiled, but soon looked serious. "That's a nice thought, but they're moving out soon. It's for their own good. She's a young woman, and she needs to find someone her own age." Faith playfully hit his arm. "What was that for?" he asked, surprised. "For not seeing what's right in front of you. They talked to me, you know. Cindy even called to ask you about your favorite foods. Have you noticed how great your meals always taste? Junior told me about their struggles. Devin wasn't a good husband or dad. They were desperate, and they found you just when you needed each other. Now you need to move on. Embrace the future. You've always wanted a big family, Dad, and look, God gave you one. Are you really going to turn away from that gift?" He stood there, amazed. "Really?" Faith gave him a gentle push towards the door. "Go get the kids and bring them home. We'll handle the fish and prepare for the fry. And Dad, I want the whole family there, okay? Every single one of them. You can bring Cindy along if you need to." She cuddled up to him as she used to when she was little. "Daddy, I have a surprise for you tomorrow. I hope you'll like it." He gathered the kids in the truck, curious about what the surprise could be. When they got back, the kids burst out, sharing how much fun they had and all about the fish they caught. Hope felt proud when they showed the catfish on Charlie's phone. The boys proudly declared they caught even more crappie, so it was a fair trade. Hope chose to smile instead of arguing. After their baths and dinner, the kids went to bed. Cindy held Grace next to Faith, then went to find Charlie, discovering him in his favorite spot on the porch swing. "Charlie, can we talk?" she asked. He patted the spot next to him, and she sat close, almost by accident. "Let me share some feelings, Charlie, and please hear me out. I loved Devin, but he wasn't a good husband or father. You've given my kids more attention in 6 months than he did during our whole time together." When the cousins noticed him taking what wasn't his, you intervened and fixed things, but you weren't naive. You arranged for him to borrow money from the bank, setting the payments low enough that he might have vanished before paying it back. "How did he repay your kindness?" they asked. "He took even more and then vanished. The loan failed, stealing his kid's future. I'm just glad you kept his part of the farm instead of someone unknown." Charlie began to say something, but she stopped him. "Please, let me finish. It's hard for me to say all this. If you interrupt, I might lose courage. As things grew worse, I kept dreaming of coming back here. You think it was just happenstance that I came here first? Out of all my family, you were the one who would likely help me, and you were just as great as I imagined. So kind, especially with the kids. I know I was difficult at first, but you must remember, Charlie, I had been through so much. I was struggling to feed and shelter my family. I felt embarrassed to rely on your generosity. When I told you I needed work, you began paying me to help around the house. How was that fair? You keep things so tidy. Cleaning up after you was easy compared to managing 5 kids. She held his hand tightly. Somewhere along the way, Charlie, I realized there are still good men out there, and I was lucky enough to be with one of the best. I watched you with Grace, how you engaged with Faith and answered her many questions, how you supported Hope, and how you treated the boys. Those kids would be lost without you. She took a deep breath, knowing the next part would be difficult. After all she had faced, if he turned her away now, she would lose all confidence. And as I watched you, Charlie, I understood that I wanted those kids to be with you as long as possible, because that's how long I wanted to be with you. I love you, Charlie. Did you hear me? I love you. Not as a mentor or father figure to my children, but as a partner. I'm not like my past. When I love, I give everything to my partner. I'm here, asking you to let us stay with you, at least until we see if we have a future together. And one more thing, she added. I don't care about our age difference. I'm 40 and you're 59. It doesn't matter to me. I don't want your money. Keep it. Give it to Faith as you should. Our future together will be enough." Connie leaned against him, feeling nervous as she waited. Charlie sat silently, making her anxious. "If that's true, why did you want to leave?" he asked. "Oh, Charlie, it hurt so much when you gave me that check. I didn't want to go. I wanted you to ask me to stay. I struggle with confidence, remember? I wanted you to take the next step. That's why I'm here now, trying to fix my mistake." He looked at her, his expression serious, and she feared she might have lost him for good. But then, he bent down and kissed her. It took her a moment to soak in what just happened, and then she kissed him back. He finally pulled away, smiling. "It's a good thing you're good-looking because you aren't very smart." He thought she was pretty. Wait, did he just call her silly? He hurried to continue before she could think too much. "Did you ever consider just telling me how you feel? Because I've liked you for a while, but I held back because of the age difference. Look at all the time we've wasted. If he thinks he can call me silly and get... Wait, he feels the same way? I really care about this man." They sat on the couch hugging and kissing until the kitchen light turned on. One of the kids was up for a glass of milk or a bedtime snack. Connie quickly stood up and kissed his forehead. "This conversation isn't over," she whispered as she went inside. He playfully tapped her shoulder, smiling. "It sure isn't, little lady." "Just wait," she thought. "I'll show him." The next morning, all the kids watched in surprise as Cindy climbed onto Charlie's lap and gave him a kiss during breakfast. Hope and Faith understood right away. They would explain it to the twins later. "Kids, your mom and I need to go into town for about an hour. Promise me you'll behave for Faith or no fish fry for any of us, understand?" They all agreed, and off they went. When they reached the dealership, Charlie told her to pick anything new that could fit the family. "I thought I was getting a used one. Used was for leaving. New is for never leaving. Got it?" Never leaving? That meant... She hugged him tightly and kissed him. The sales manager watched with a smile. This would be fun to share with everyone at the diner. 90 minutes later, Connie was driving her new van home. Home! It felt great to think that. The kids jumped out to check out their new vehicle. When they arrived, Faith smiled. It seemed Dad was still able to learn new tricks. She hugged and kissed all the kids, including Grace, who was happily held by Charlie. "Connie, Jr., can you help me with the food? TY has been cooking for a while. There should be enough to start with." It was a lovely afternoon. They ate and relaxed. Faith had set up the badminton net, and she and Junior played against Hope and Charlie. The boys discovered the horseshoe pits, and Charlie showed them the basics before joining Connie and Grace for some fun with colorful balls. When it was time to leave, Junior brought out an overnight bag. It looked like she and Grace were having a sleepover. Hope and the boys were tired and fell asleep right after their baths. Charlie and Connie soon found themselves sharing sweet moments on the porch swing, hands intertwined and smiles bright. "Ah, if it weren't for the kids." Connie laughed, asking, "What about the kids? If this happens, you're going to be stuck here with me. They will hear us sooner or later. I still wish we had some privacy." "Well, unless you know another spot I don't, we'll just have to wait." Charlie looked out at the yard, upset, as the moonlight broke through the clouds and lit up the barn. "Come on," he said, grabbing her with one hand and the old quilt with the other. Connie giggled as they reached the door. "Really, Charlie? The barn loft? Are we acting like kids, sneaking away from our parents?" "No, we're two grown-ups on our land, trying to escape the kids for a bit. Now hurry up the ladder and I'll help you." She was halfway up the ladder when she felt his hand slide under her dress. She let out a surprised squeal. "Charlie, stop that! You want me to fall? Oh, that feels nice. Just a little more. That's it. Oh, now!" She laughed down at him. "That serves you right. I hope you don't slip on what I left behind. Come on, move faster or I'll start without you." Just as he reached the top of the ladder, her dress flew over his face. When he got it out of his way, she was lying comfortably on the blanket, the moonlight shining on her. He paused to stare at her in amazement, but then she smiled and said, "I told you I'd get started without you. Come over here and see if you can keep up before you tire out." She felt a rush of excitement. Maybe this loft idea wasn't so bad after all. She was certain the kids would have been knocking on the door in no time. She giggled in joy, feeling carefree and delighted. Rose felt older now and lonely. She was making good money, probably as much as Charlie, but she knew it wasn't a competition. Charlie only cared about money to ensure he could take care of those he loved. Over the past 5 years, she had many different partners. They ranged in age, including a 19-year-old who was quite energetic. The moments shared were thrilling, but afterward she felt empty. Rarely did they stay the night, and when they left, Rose would curl up and dream of being held tightly all night. Andy had called her after his run-in with Charlie. She didn't feel sorry for him. "You should have slipped away right after we were together. You're the one who wanted to stay the weekend. You better hope Charlie never finds out the truth. I can't believe you talked me into that." Charlie really cared about William's wife, so if he found out for sure, he would tell her right away. The conversation took a turn, but it made her think about Charlie again. She had seen him 3 times in the last 4 years, twice at funerals and once at a restaurant when he was visiting one of his stores. She thought about saying hi, but he was with a woman, and it seemed like they were enjoying each other's company. The way they interacted made that idea go away. Oddly, she felt a little jealous. She wished that woman would keep her distance. Then she remembered Charlie wasn't hers anymore, and he hadn't been for 5 years. It was time to move on. She quietly slipped out, leaving money for her unfinished meal and a generous tip. At the second funeral, Rose approached Charlie, chatting about Faith until they were alone. "Charlie, do you remember that offer I made when we parted? Have you thought about it?" He seemed troubled by the memory. "Yes, I remember. I'm sorry, Rose, but I can't accept it. There's too much going on for me to consider it. I hope you have a good life. We'll see each other sometimes, especially since we need to help our daughter get married soon. Excuse me, but I have to go." She watched him walk away, feeling her heart break again. He still looked great and fit, even a bit thinner, which suited him. She couldn't believe how foolish she had been. That night she stayed with Faith, something she did often when she was in town. She met Charlie T.Y. and could tell from Faith's eyes that he would soon be her son-in-law. She liked him a lot, especially when she noticed he had similar views as her Charlie. Rose and Faith had reconciled to the point where they still went on their annual shopping trips together. It wasn't as much fun since Faith was pretty conservative, except when it came to certain items, where she had quite the imagination. Rose looked at some pieces and thought how she wished such things had been around when she and Charlie were younger. If they had been, maybe he wouldn't have aged so much. She figured Faith was shopping for her Charlie. She made a comment about one selection. "That's pretty, but it doesn't seem comfortable for long." "Mom," Faith giggled, "these aren't meant to be worn for long. They're for looking good and coming off quickly. If my Charlie leaves anything like this on me for more than 5 minutes, it's gone." Rose smiled, recalling moments from her past with Charlie that were more memorable than others. She woke up from a light sleep, still thinking about a dream she had of her and Charlie in a hayloft. Making a quick choice, she quietly got out of bed, put on the most daring outfit she had, and slipped out of the house. Soon, she reached the entrance to Charlie's driveway, surprised to find the gate still open. Everyone was tired, and since Charlie had 4 beers, Connie had driven and forgot to close it. She parked behind the barn, trying to think of a plan as she walked to the door. Halfway there, she paused. What was that sound? Then she heard voices. "Charlie, be careful. I'm not using protection, and I could get pregnant, please." The last word was a shout, as she felt the moment peak and another wave of feelings washed over her. Rose could hear heavy breathing as they settled down. "Charlie, if I get pregnant, I'll—" She heard Charlie laugh. "If you're pregnant, we'll name him Junior and take care of him just like our other kids. I hope you are pregnant. In fact, I think we should try it again just to be sure. What do you say?" Connie reached for him, laughing. "What if it's a girl?" "It's a boy. I can tell. And if it's a girl, do you think naming her Faith the Third would be too much?" "Oh, Charlie, that feels amazing. Let's talk about names." "Ah!" Rose turned away, tears in her eyes, her dreams shattered, and drove home. She left the next morning without saying a word. 2 years later, she met Freddie, who was 6 years older but still healthy and attractive for his age. They connected and spent time together. She continued to have her fun but kept it separate from them. When he asked her to marry him, she said no and told him about her past, being completely honest. She was surprised by his response. "I'm impotent, Rose. I haven't been able to for 5 years. There's nothing out there that can help, and I've looked into everything. So if we get married, it will be for love and companionship. I'll let you have your fun on the side, as long as it's discreet and away from our home if you promise to always come back to me." Rose was shocked, but accepted. She introduced him to Faith and her son-in-law Charlie, relieved when they welcomed him. They attended the small wedding, wishing her well. Charlie sent a gift, a cruise along European rivers and towns with first-class tickets for their honeymoon suite. It was one of the dreams she and Charlie talked about when they were younger but never fulfilled. For 2 more years, Rose enjoyed herself, no more than twice a year, until she lost interest in that part of her life. She and Fred, inspired by the cruise Charlie had given them, took a world cruise and enjoyed many small adventures until Fred's health declined. He passed away when Rose was 70. She had sold her business when she married, putting half of the money in a trust fund for Faith. Faith was amazed by the amount and thought about refusing it until she felt a little kick, realizing she was having a girl this time. She planned to keep it for herself and her son, along with the children who would come later. When Rose passed away at 75, Faith received everything, including an estate from Fred that was twice the size of Rose's. He left Faith a letter. "I may not have had my own children, but I often wished I could meet your father for raising someone like you. He taught you well, and the kindness you showed me, even calling me your child's other grandfather, made me realize what I missed by not being a father. So take the money, my dear, for all the love you gave me." Suddenly, Charlie T.Y. found himself married to the richest woman in the state. "Does this mean we can think about having more kids?" They ended up with 5. Charlie looked at his beautiful bride and couldn't help but chuckle softly at the guests who had been there just 5 weeks earlier for another wedding. Faith had a moment alone with him during the fish fry. She seemed a bit anxious. "Dad, remember when we talked about making new memories on the patio? How I mentioned watching your grandchild take their first steps? In 7 months, we'll know whether it's a boy or a girl. So think about 18 to 20 months from now, and we'll see that moment together." She leaned back, waiting nervously for his response. Charlie sat back in shock, feeling overwhelmed. First, he had found a new partner, and second, one of his greatest dreams was coming true. He couldn't help but cry for the first time in his life, tears of joy spilling down his face. He was quickly surrounded by his blended family. Junior and Grace jumped onto his lap. The others, including the boys, were also filled with emotions. When the news sank in, smiles appeared like sunshine, and everyone embraced Faith. The 2 Charlies gathered together. "You know this wedding is going to be huge, right?" T.Y. sighed. "I know, but it's just a ceremony. We got married in a civil ceremony as soon as we found out." It felt right. Charlie Sr. smiled, proud of his daughter's decision. "Just letting you know. Her mother has been planning this since she saw the sonogram and found out it was a girl." Rose was thrilled, but she did tone it down a bit after realizing how soon the wedding would be. Just 5 weeks later, their little church was filled to the brim as Charlie and Faith celebrated their vows again. The reception had to move to the civic auditorium due to the large number of guests. Rose beamed with pride at Charlie when the preacher asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" And Charlie responded with confidence, "Her mother and I do." Connie kept her distance, but she noticed the warmth between Charlie and the kids and smiled a bittersweet smile. It seemed Charlie had the big family they had always wanted. Too bad it was with someone else. Putting the past behind her, she mingled. Old disagreements faded away, and people she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to her. She noticed it was strange that even though Sheriff Andy's daughter was a bridesmaid, he didn't come. Andy's wife was there, and Rose made sure they stayed apart. She also felt uneasy when she saw that Amanda Williams and Carla Bishop would be bridesmaids, but it seemed they were unaware of the situation. 4 weeks later, Connie burst into the living room holding a small piece of paper. The kids rushed in as Charlie laughed, and Connie poured out her feelings to him. "You old fool! I warned you this would happen! What are we going to do now that I'm pregnant?" She fell into his embrace, tears streaming down her face. He lifted her chin gently and kissed her. "It means we are going to do what we discussed in the barn. We're going to raise this child with love just like we do with our other kids. And yes, it seems I need to marry you. What a challenge this is." He let out an exaggerated sigh. "When the little one arrives, you'll help with all the sleepless nights and caring for the baby. and I expect you to be a supportive dad, but don't worry. The kids we have now will help you learn the ropes. And how do you know I'll marry you? I think we'll let the family decide, and you're not allowed to vote. Kids, how many of you think it's a good idea for me to marry this old fool? Can you manage with him as he gets older? I know he's a bit on the older side, but he seems healthy enough. If we take care of him, he might stick around a while. What do you think? She counted the votes. Looks like everyone agrees. So, old fool, you're stuck with us. No backing out now. Wait! Shouted Faith. It's not official yet. He hasn't asked you properly, and I don't see any ring. Is this how you want to start? Hope chuckled, repeating Faith. Yeah, really, Dad? Grace, not quite getting the situation, joined in. Way why, Dad? Charlie laughed loudly, playfully setting Connie down on the floor. Boys, help your dear mother up. The girls and I are off for a shopping trip. Soon, Charlie and the girls, including Grace, were on their way to the jewelry store. The owner, Jack, knew Charlie well and was surprised to see him with all the girls. He was even more surprised when Charlie explained the reason for their visit. Jack, what do you have in terms of engagement and wedding rings? I have a good selection, Charlie. Who are they for? Charlie seemed taken aback by the question. Well, they're for me, Jack. More specifically, they're for the woman I want to marry. Now show me what you have. They looked at all the lovely rings, and the girls even tried some on, discovering that Faith and Connie wore the same size. Eventually, they chose a beautiful set, the most expensive one in the store. Then Charlie surprised the jeweler again. Do you have matching bands for the girls? I'm not just marrying her, I'm welcoming the whole family. He turned to the girls. How does that sound to you? You can wear them on your pinky, look down, and feel part of a caring family. The cheers brought Grace back to her feet, and a shopkeeper helped Charlie pick out a small ring just for her. She smiled as she admired it on her little finger. Charlie tried to take it off, but she held onto it tightly. They left the shop, rings on their pinkies, carrying a brightly wrapped box. The jeweler watched them head into a local restaurant before turning over the closed sign. It was 11:30. He glanced at the surprised saleswoman. Well, come on, which place do you prefer, the diner or the sandwich shop? Do you want someone else to spread the word that the old silver fox is finally settled down? She grabbed her purse. I'll take the sandwich shop, you take the diner. I probably won't be back until 1:30. Jack nodded. Good idea. See you then. They went out in different directions, almost rushing. By the end of the day, everyone in the area knew about the engagement. Charlie and the girls enjoyed their meal and the attention. Someone had dashed out of the sandwich shop and hurried back in, telling the hostess. Soon, the whole place was buzzing. Finally, one of the oldest women in the restaurant approached him. This woman had been his babysitter and had taught him to play the piano, a skill he still enjoyed. Is it true, Charlie? He was about to tease her, but decided to let her have this moment. Yes, it is, Mabel. Let me introduce my new daughters. This is Faith, this is Hope, and this little one is Grace. They will all need lessons. Do you think you have room for them? I have a couple of boys too, but I'm not sure if they are interested. I will give you a call. Now, Mabel, it's time for me to take my girls home. See you later. Charlie noticed how quickly the 76-year-old woman moved toward her friends, surprising him. One thing became clear as they drove down the highway. In all the excitement, no one had thought to ask who he was marrying. He could just imagine that driving them wild. Connie and the boys were waiting on the porch. Connie jumped in as soon as he parked. Listen here, old goat. Just because you buy a ring doesn't mean I will like it. I might not want, oh my, that is so beautiful. Charlie dropped to his knee. It's yours, little girl, or it will be as soon as you say yes. Connie, will you marry me? Yes! Her excitement was so loud that it startled horses 2 farms away. Then she sat in his lap, overwhelmed with joy. Once she calmed down, the girls showed her their rings, and she began to cry again from happiness. They walked down the aisle together. Grace was the flower girl, beaming in her satin dress, tossing petals all around. Faith stood for Connie, while Junior and Hope looked lovely. Charlie felt a warm pang in his heart as he looked at them, recalling sweet moments shared before. Charlie stood with the twins next to him, both looking a bit uneasy in their suits. Everything went smoothly until it was time to kiss the bride. As they finished, Charlie felt a tug on his pants. "Kiss me too, Daddy," said Grace. The crowd laughed as he picked her up and gave her a kiss. They spent their honeymoon on a beach, enjoying the soft sand and nice evenings. They shared loving moments often, tried snorkeling and loved it, but were not so fond of parasailing. A week later, they returned home, picking up their kids from Faith. They showed them pictures from the trip and promised a family vacation right before school started. The ultrasound revealed they were having a boy, and Charlie smiled. Connie teased him, calling him self-centered. He jokingly called her his little girl and playfully rubbed her side, making the nurse laugh and Connie frown. She scolded him until they got to the truck, then felt bad and lightly nibbled on his ear, and they both agreed that nibbling was better than scolding. Charlie Jr. was born without any problems and was healthy. They had worried a bit because of their age, but they decided they would love him no matter what. Over the years, Faith enjoyed introducing everyone. "Hi, I'm Faith. This is my little sister Faith. This is my husband Charlie, my father Charlie, and my brother Charlie. We don't have many creative names." Faith had 2 daughters. She named one Rose after her mother and the other Constance after her stepmother. This really helped with the name confusion. As Charlie thought about his children near the end of his life, he realized that Faith Jr. was the closest to him. She worked one season with her sister, but decided she didn't like working with sick animals. She cared for their clinic cat, Lady Gray, who only had 3 legs but moved beautifully. Faith Sr. mentioned that there was a story about the cat, but Faith Jr. was too young to hear it yet. So she began spending after-school time and summers following her new dad around. She worked part-time at the garden center and learned the hardware business from the ground up. She was in advanced classes in school and would graduate at 17, already accepted into 4 excellent business programs. She was set to take over when Charlie stepped down. Hope, it turned out, had a talent for gardening. At 13, she convinced Charlie to buy her a tiller and give her a small piece of land, growing much of their family's food there. Soon, she persuaded him to buy a nearly extinct breed of sheep for a conservation project. Next, she introduced a rare breed of pony, bringing the boys into the mix. Together, they built one of the most respected breeding programs in the country. It seems Hope may follow in Faith's footsteps with her career choices. I bought her a small tractor and some tools, and I got one of the cousins to teach her how to use it safely. I had to stop letting the cousins keep their hay in my barn because she was using it now. She was 17 and smiled at me while we stacked the hay in the loft with the boys passing it up to us. It seemed she liked the smaller bales instead of the big round ones. "Now, Dad, I'm going to feed this to my animals, so please don't mess up the bales, okay?" I just smiled, knowing that when we felt like it, we'd climb the ladder for more fun. Little Grace wasn't so little anymore. At 10 years old, she was looking more like her mother every day. I felt nervous about Hope and Junior dating. I probably needed to buy more shotguns. Grace was a talented piano player, playing pieces that amazed everyone around. A school 4 states away wanted her to live there to study, but she would only agree to spend half her summers there. I knew that as she grew more confident, it wouldn't be long before she made the big move, and while I didn't like it, I knew I couldn't hold back her talent. That left Junior, still just learning to walk. I would have kids around for a long time, and I loved every moment. With the money I had saved, they would all have a secure future, but I put it in trust funds for them with some rules. They had to finish college, and if they didn't, the trust would be held for an extra 5 years. They also had to work and manage their money for 2 years before they could access the trust. I apologized to Faith Sr. for using some of her inheritance. She laughed and said her mother would make up any loss, and she didn't want to stop her siblings from getting their shares. The truth came out a few years after Sheriff Andy lost his election and his wife left him. He started working for a private investigator 2 states away, earning good money, until he had to start paying alimony. He married again years later, but that marriage lasted only 4 years. He found out she was unfaithful while he was looking into someone else's relationship. He discovered that she was involved with a woman he was investigating. They divorced, and he never married again. When Amanda found out, she divorced him, not just for that, but also because she had caught him with another woman. This time, it was with an assistant district attorney. When a case fell apart due to the affair, the new sheriff fired him. Curiously, a year later, Amanda started dating John. He was 12 years older than her, but after she told Charlie about it one day at lunch, she smiled and said, "Apparently, older guys are more trustworthy." They got married when she was 38 and he was 50. Carla lived with her husband until he passed away 48 years later. She never remarried and retired as chief detective for the county. 2 years later, she came out of retirement to run for sheriff after John stepped down. She won her election and served 2 full terms before retiring from public life. Charlie passed away 2 months after his 79th birthday, only weeks after seeing his youngest son graduate from high school. Cindy, his wife, chose not to remarry and joined him 15 years later, resting beside him in the Baptist cemetery. Rose, Charlie's close friend, had been cremated years earlier, with her ashes spread into the ocean alongside her husband Fred's at one of their favorite vacation spots. When Charlie passed, the community came together for his funeral. It was held at the local high school football stadium to accommodate the large crowd. 800 people from Barton volunteered to carry his casket, but since they couldn't all do so, a lottery was held to select the bearers. The rest walked ahead of the casket in a show of respect, forming a procession that included a horse-drawn hearse led by the ponies Hope had raised. Sheriff Carla led the somber march. Throughout his life, Charlie had generously supported nearly 1,000 students, helping them achieve college educations. Many more local community members also benefited from his kindness. At his funeral, attendees included members of Congress, state governors, law enforcement officials, educators, lawyers, scientists, business leaders, and even a few well-known actors and public figures. All were there to honor Charlie's generosity and influence in their lives, though Charlie had been known as a force to reckon with in difficult situations. Any stories of his stern dealings were never widely shared, both because few would believe them and because he kept such matters very private. Bobby Peterson, meanwhile, had found himself in a very different place. He awoke in prison, dealing with the pain of a broken nose, a welcome gift from a fellow inmate. He was shocked by his long sentence, which would keep him in prison for over a decade, with an additional 18 months added due to past violent actions. To make matters worse, he was sent to Rockwell, a facility with a tough reputation, where conditions were far from easy. On his first day, he found himself assigned to share a cell with a towering, intimidating man who quickly made it clear that Bobby's life in prison would be difficult. This cellmate informed Bobby that he was under strict rules. He was expected to follow directions without question. Bobby was now under his influence, left with little choice but to adapt to this new, harsh reality. Over time, Bobby faced the hardships of prison life, adjusting to his circumstances under the strict watch of his cellmate. "You need to show your new daddy how special you are." Bobby cried softly as he got ready, then knelt down and moved over. Charlie was right. He felt weak and almost fainted. After 6 months, Bobby had changed so much that people began to notice him more. His daddy sometimes let others spend time with him, and some even marked their signs on his skin. By the 5th year, there was hardly any space left for more marks. He had a new daddy by then, someone who had a way to keep him safe. This new daddy was kinder and didn't want to share him. Bobby, having been in that environment, fell in love. He felt very sad when his daddy had to leave. After 3 months of being passed around, he was freed early for good behavior. His father had stopped visiting him after 6 years, and there was no one waiting for him. As the crowd got smaller, he spotted his prison daddy, the one he liked, waiting for him. He rushed into his arms and they went home together. His daddy helped him change his appearance, getting him a few enhancements and helping him look his best. Bobby began to work at a cosmetics counter while also fixing motorcycles, and a year later they got married. So, in his own way, despite all he went through, he found happiness in the end. Bobby read about the news of his daddy's passing, which made headlines because of the people who attended the funeral. It didn't affect him much. At that time, his adopted child was teething and quite fussy. He comforted the baby, feeding him ice chips until he fell asleep. Interestingly, they named him Charlie. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.